Chapter 171. The sky was dark and gloomy, and the dark clouds seemed to cover the earth with no end in sight. The flames of war in Ice Stone City had stopped, but the citizens were still in a heavy mood. Especially the slaves who had surrendered. They were shackled again and crouched at the foot of the city walls, shivering, their hearts filled with despair. "Hey, Cripple, do you think the Lord wants to starve us to death?" The slave named Cripple scratched his head and mumbled, "How would I know? Do you even need to think about it?" Another slave said weakly as he lay on the ground, "The city is already lacking food, why would the Lord waste food on us? Then, are we just going to wait for death? What else? Do you still want to fight your way out?" The slave who asked the question couldn't help but tremble. He seemed to have recalled the terrifying scene of the black cavalry charging and instantly shut his mouth. The aura of despair grew stronger. The aura of death emitted from the slaves had even attracted a few vultures circling in the air. They were silently waiting for the upcoming feast. Cripple was still a bit unwilling. He was still young and didn't want to die yet. Looking at the patrolling soldiers, he hesitated for a moment before finally gathering his courage. But just as he struggled to stand up and was about to walk towards the soldiers, he suddenly saw the city gate not far away open. Amidst the clattering of horse hooves, a large caravan slowly drove into Ice Stone City. Cripple didn't care about the caravan, he only cared about food. Sir, are you calling me?" The soldier looked at Cripple, who was continuously approaching, his right hand gripping the hilt of his sword as he said cautiously, "Stay where you are. Don't come any closer." Yes. "What do you want?" "Sir, I'm really starving, can you give me some food?" Cripple bowed and begged, "I'm very strong, I can help you, I can do anything. Don't worry, I'll arrange for you to work later." "Then, is there food?" "Yes, as long as you're willing to work, there will be." "Really?" Cripple still couldn't believe that such a good thing could actually happen. "Why would I lie to you?" The soldier waved his hand impatiently, "Go back and stay there." Lame Leg didn't go back. Instead, he asked nervously, Sir, isn't there a shortage of food in the city? Why are you giving us food?" The soldier pointed at the caravan that was entering the city. "Do you know what those caravans are carrying?" The lame man shook his head stupidly. "Food." The soldier said proudly, "Sir Lord brought back a large amount of food from the half-elf kingdom, which is enough for you to eat." Really? The cripple's eyes lit up, and his whole body trembled with excitement. The soldier didn't want to deal with this annoying slave anymore. He waved his hand and told him to hurry back. The crippled man immediately knelt on the ground and kowtowed in the direction of the Red Fort. "Thank you, my lord. Praise you, my lord." His strange behavior also aroused the curiosity of the other slaves, who gathered around to inquire. Then, the cripple told the other slaves the good news he had just received. Soon, this news spread like the plague. More and more slaves began to imitate the cripple, kowtowing on the ground and praising their benevolent lord. In an instant, the entire Ice Stone City seemed to come alive. The aura of death that enveloped the city gradually dissipated, and the frightened vultures flapped their wings and scattered. Not long after, the soldiers began to divide the slaves into groups of about 10 people. Each group was led by a soldier, and they were assigned different tasks, such as repairing the city walls, cleaning the streets, building refugee camps. The cripple was assigned the task of repairing a house in the city. When he followed the leading soldier to the front of the collapsed house, he suddenly felt a bit awkward, because he remembered that he had taken advantage of the chaos to rush into this house and steal something. With a trace of shame, the cripple immediately went forward and began to work. A slave next to him asked the leading soldier uncertainly, "Sir, when will we have food to eat?" "At noon, hurry up and get to work." Okay. When the slaves heard that there was food, they ignored their hunger and exhaustion and immediately got to work. It was finally noon. The cripple, who was already exhausted, squeezed into the long line of slaves and walked towards the place where they received food. After walking for who knows how long, he finally smelled a faint meaty aroma. Gulp. For a moment, the sound of saliva being swallowed rose and fell. The cripple stretched his neck and looked forward, but he could only vaguely see a high platform and a huge iron pot on it. After a long wait, the cripple finally arrived in front of the high platform. The soldier handed him 3 pieces of black bread and a bowl of steaming meat soup. Although it was called meat soup, there was no trace of meat in it at all. There was only a layer of fat floating on top and a faint meaty aroma, proving that it was indeed meat soup and not water. Facing this kind of food, the cripple actually cried. It wasn't that he disliked the food, but that it was too good. As a slave, he had never eaten meat in his entire life. Now that he could actually drink meat soup, the cripple felt that his life was worth it. Dipping the bread in the meat soup, the cripple stuffed it into his stomach in a few mouthfuls. Then, he did not mind that it was hot and directly drank the entire bowl of meat soup into his stomach. Feeling the warmth spreading from his abdomen to his whole body, the cripple suddenly felt that his whole body was full of energy. "Sir, after work in the afternoon, is there still food to eat?" "Of course." "What about tomorrow?" "There is also tomorrow." "What about the day after tomorrow?" "Are you done yet?" The soldier was angry and glared at the cripple. "As long as you work for the Lord, you will naturally have food to eat." The cripple did not know what to say at the moment. In his heart, the Lord seemed to be on the same level as the God of light. There is not only food. The soldier gathered all the slaves in his group and explained, there are also points. Points? The slaves looked at each other, completely clueless as to what this meant. Points can they be eaten? The cripple asked with trepidation. The soldier sneered and shook his head. Points can't be eaten. But they are very useful. Without waiting for the slaves to continue asking, the soldier announced, the one who worked the hardest this morning was the cripple. Does anyone have any objections? The slaves shook their heads. The cripple was indeed the one who worked the hardest today, and everyone could see that. Well, then I will give the cripple this morning's points. The soldier immediately took out a roll of parchment and began to record. The cripple was still confused. "Sir, points, what are they used for?" "Points can help you get rid of your slave status and become free people." "Free people?" This time, the rest of the slaves could not sit still. They gathered around the soldier and asked, "Sir, how many points do we need to become a free person?" "I don't know." The soldier spread his hands. "The Lord said that there will be a competition every month. The 10 slaves with the most points in the city will become free people." Whoosh, the slaves shouted excitedly. They did not know how many slaves there were in the city, and how rare it was to get 10 places every month. But they already saw hope, the hope of a class transition. This hope changed their mental outlook completely, as if they had become completely different people. When the afternoon work began again, all the slaves fought over the work like crazy, afraid that they would be outdone by their companions. A feverish mood gradually enveloped Ice Stone City. Chapter 172. Colin, do the slaves of Ice Stone City always work so hard? Viscount Lawrence walked on the street and smiled at Colin. From the way he addressed Colin, it could be seen that the two were already quite familiar with each other. One had an ulterior motive, while the other had a favor to ask. Thus, the relationship between Colin and Lawrence quickly warmed up, and they were as close as brothers who had grown up together. "Ha, that's because I gave them meat to eat." Colin laughed, but didn't tell Lawrence about the point system that truly motivated these slaves. "You are too benevolent," Lawrence laughed, but then a trace of envy flashed across his face, "and you are too rich." Colin laughed and shook his head, saying self-deprecatingly, "How can I be considered rich? I still owe the Tulip Merchant Guild 300,000 gold coins." Speaking of which. Lawrence's expression suddenly turned serious. "Colin, why did I hear that your subordinates sealed up the Tulip Merchant Guild's outpost in Ice Stone City? And even arrested the person in charge there?" Is there such a thing? Colin had an innocent expression as he turned to look at the Knight of Rigo behind him. Rigo, what happened? The Knight of Rigo rubbed his big bald head and smiled foolishly. My lord, there is indeed such a thing. It was Lord Quincy's order, saying that he suspected them of tax evasion. Is that so? Colin pretended to frown, then immediately vowed to Viscount Lawrence, Lawrence, don't worry, I will personally investigate this matter when I return. I will definitely not accuse innocent people. Then I am relieved. It was unknown if Viscount Lawrence saw through Colin's trick, but he coughed lightly and said, Colin, father has actually always thought highly of you, and hopes that the two families can have a closer relationship. I feel that the relationship between our two families is already very close. Colin blinked and smiled. Didn't my sister marry Knight Vala? Yes, that's right. Viscount Lawrence frowned when he heard Vala's name. It was as if he felt that the name of the illegitimate child had sullied his ears. Actually, the relationship between our two families can be further improved. Viscount Lawrence's eyes were filled with undisguised eagerness. What do you mean? Viscount Lawrence suddenly smiled ambiguously and said, I have a younger sister who hasn't married yet. She is as beautiful as a flower and has a dignified and refined personality. If Colin is interested, I can go back and mention it to my father. I'm sure he would be very happy to have a son-in-law like you. After these days of interaction, Viscount Lawrence had already determined that Colin had great value in roping him in. When the northern frontier was about to usher in a great change, he couldn't help but take the initiative to extend an olive branch. Colin raised his eyebrows, clearly a little surprised. The Oman family wanted to form a marriage alliance with the Angeli family. What was that old silver Earl Oman planning to do? Of course, Colin didn't know that this was actually an idea that Lawrence had come up with on the spur of the moment, and it wasn't instructed by Earl Oman. I'm sorry, Lawrence. You should also know that I have always admired Miss Vera, so, Colin decisively rejected the offer. How could the Earl's daughter be compared to Vera? Moreover, his vigilance towards the Oman family had not decreased at all. That's really a pity. Viscount Lawrence sighed, as if he was really regretful. But soon, he calmed down and gave his blessings. Then I wish you a smooth marriage with Miss Vera. Colin quickly thanked him. The two of them walked out of the city and Viscount Lawrence smiled and said, Colin, you can stop here. Okay. Recently, there have been many rebellions on the northern frontier, so you must be careful on the road. Viscount Lawrence waved his hand casually. Don't worry, those rebellious slaves are no match for the Oman family's guards. Just as Viscount Lawrence was about to leave, Colin suddenly called out to him and said in a seemingly casual manner, Don't worry. When you mentioned Knight Vala, I suddenly realized that I haven't seen my brother-in-law in a long time. I heard that he was injured in the war with the trolls and I was worried for him for a while. I wonder if I can invite Knight Vala, and of course my sister, to Ice Stone City as guests. Of course. When I return to Fallen Eagle City this time, I will definitely pass on your invitation to Knight Vala and Miss Caitlin. When Colin heard this, his smile became even brighter. After that, the two of them said their goodbyes again, as if they really couldn't bear to part. When the Oman family's convoy gradually disappeared outside the city, Colin put away the fake smile on his face and turned to ask the Knight of Rigo, Did the manager of the Tulip Chamber of Commerce speak? Yes, sir. According to him, the Tulip Chamber of Commerce's actions of hoarding food and pushing up the price of food were orders from the headquarters. Moreover, the slave rebellion in Ice Stone City, and even the entire Viscount's territory, is inextricably linked to the Tulip Chamber of Commerce. Colin muttered to himself for a moment before ordering, Make the arrangements, I want to see him. Yes. Colin then turned his horse around and returned to the city. When he passed by a residential area, he suddenly stopped in his tracks. Therefore, the points for half a day this morning will still be given to Cripple. The soldier announced loudly and recorded it down with a quill. Thank you, sir. Thank you, sir. Cripple was so excited that his face was red as he repeatedly thanked him. Then, he saw Colin standing in the middle of the road. Cripple didn't recognize Colin, and of course, he didn't know how to tell a noble's rank from the style of his attire. However, he could tell from the group of guards behind Colin that this young man in front of him was an important person. Thus, he very cleverly prostrated himself on the ground and respectfully called out, "Greetings, master." The leading soldier obviously recognized Colin as he hurriedly stepped forward and bowed, "Sir Viscounts." The crippled man's eyes widened as he realized that he had actually met the feudal lord. He slightly raised his head and carefully sized up Colin from the corner of his eyes, his heart full of gratitude and worship. Only then did the other slaves come to their senses and kneel on the ground, saluting Colin. Colin looked at Cripple and asked curiously, "You're called Cripple?" "Yes. Yes. Sir Lord." Cripple felt that his heart was about to jump out of his chest. "But I don't think you're crippled." "Sir, my father's right leg was crippled, so he was called Cripple. After he died, he gave his name to me." Names could be inherited. This sounded ridiculous, but it was actually very normal among slaves. "Oh, then you should be called Cripple II." Colin made a joke, but unfortunately, the slaves did not understand. The atmosphere was a little cold for a moment. "Yes, sir, from now on I'll be called Cripple II." Cripple gave face and immediately kowtowed to Colin to thank him. Colin laughed and waved his hand. "Forget it, you should continue to be called Cripple. Otherwise, if the other nobles hear that a slave dares to be called Cripple II, who knows, they might just send you to the gallows." "Yes, sir." Cripple naturally did not matter. Slaves like him were named very casually, and many of them did not even have a name. Looking at this rather clever young slave, Colin suddenly smiled and said, "Limp, now I have something for you to do. Are you willing to do it?" Cripple did not hesitate to reply loudly, "Of course. It's my honor to serve you." "Good, follow me." "Yes, sir." The rest of the slaves looked at Cripple, who eagerly followed the Sir Lord, their eyes full of envy. Suddenly, a slave called out to the leading soldier, "Sir, Cripple is leaving, what about his points?" The soldier scratched his head and felt that if Cripple was chosen by the Viscounts, he would not have to worry about points, so he nodded and said, "Okay, I'll redistribute his points." "Thank you, sir." The slaves immediately cheered. The Lord's favor was too unrealistic for them, the points in front of them were more realistic. Chapter 173. In the great hall on the first floor of the Red Castle, Limp carefully sat on a chair, not even daring to breathe loudly. A beautiful half-elf maid placed a cup of hot water in front of Limp. Limp repeatedly thanked her, but did not dare to touch the delicate cup, as if he was afraid of dirtying it. The half-elf maid was none other than Cathy Savoy. When she completed the mission Colin gave her, she originally had the chance to become a baron of the half-elf kingdom, but unexpectedly, she gave the title to another member of the Savoy family and willingly became Colin's maid. Others thought that Cathy was too stupid, not knowing which to choose between a baron and a maid. But Colin felt that she was an ambitious half-elf. However, if Cathy could not show her worth, then she could only be a maid serving tea at Colin's side. After Cathy left, another fat merchant walked into the great hall under the escort of soldiers. His expression was very haggard, and there were bruises on his skin that his clothes could not cover. It was obvious that he had just been tortured to extort a confession. Colin looked at the somewhat familiar fat face and asked, "You are the manager of the Tulip Merchant Guild in Icestone City, Olma?" "Yes, Sir Viscounts." "Who is Oliver to you?" "He is my younger brother, sir." Colin suddenly smiled, "Oliver and I have some friendship. Since you are his older brother, then there is no need to be so restrained. Sit." "Yes, sir." Olma hurriedly sat down, but his heart did not relax at all. He had heard his younger brother mention this Viscount Angley long ago and knew that this was not a lord that could be easily fooled. "Olma, to be honest, I am very sad." My relationship with the Tulip Merchant Guild has always been very harmonious, and I even had a loan of up to 300,000 gold coins from your guild. But I did not expect that you would try to incite a rebellion in my territory. The fat on Olma's face trembled as he hurriedly begged for mercy. Sir, I was only following the orders of the Chamber of Commerce headquarters. I mean no harm to the Angeli family. However, the rebellion has already caused great losses to my territory. What do you think we should do? Olma hesitated, not knowing how to begin. Originally, he thought that Colin would be afraid of Count Oman, who stood behind the Tulip Chamber of Commerce, and would not dare to do anything to him. Unfortunately, the beating he received in prison made him realize the reality. This Viscount Angli didn't fear offending the Oman clan at all. A moment later, he could only dejectedly say, Sir, I'm willing to accept any punishment you say. Colin did not immediately state the punishment. Instead, he sized up Olma with a scrutinizing gaze until he felt goosebumps all over his body. You said that the order to incite the slave rebellion was issued by the Tulip Chamber of Commerce's headquarters? Yes, sir. So, this was all Ms. Penny's idea. Olma's forehead was slightly sweating, but he still gritted his teeth and said, It should be. Colin asked again, Miss Penny is Count Oman's favorite lover. Then, does the Count know about this plan? Olma's face was covered in even more cold sweat. I'm not sure about this, then what do you think? Is it possible for the Count to know? Maybe, bang. Colin suddenly slammed the round table, causing the two people opposite him to jump up in fright. Mr. Olma, do you know that you just questioned the integrity of a Count of the Northern Frontier? Aye. Olma was sweating profusely and trembling all over. Colin revealed a cold smile. Tell me, if the Count knew that you slandered him, slandered Miss Penny, and slandered the Tulip Chamber of Commerce, what would he do? Olma knelt on the ground with a plop and cried, My lord, spare me. Colin suddenly laughed again, and his tone became gentle again. Olma, I hope you can understand that it's not a matter of how I punish you, but how the Count will punish you if he knows about you. My lord, save me, get up. Olma stood up, trembling, and then saw Colin hand over a roll of paper and a quill. At the same time, he ordered, Write a letter to your brother, Oliver. Write what? Olma was at a loss. Tell him that you have leaked Count Oman's secret plan to me. Tell him to be careful and not be punished by Count Oman. My lord, Olma did not dare to touch the pen. Because he knew very well that Count Oman might not know that he had leaked the secret plan, but if such a letter fell into the hands of the Oman family, then he and his brother would definitely die without a burial place. What, you don't want to write? Colin raised his eyebrows and said coldly. I'll write. Looking at Colin's cold gaze, Olma knew that even if he was unwilling, he had to leave behind this proof of his loyalty. Seeing Olma trembling as he picked up the pen, Colin frowned and said, Don't tremble. What? Are you purposely trying to hide your handwriting? No. How would I dare? Seeing Olma obediently write this letter, Colin recovered his smile and even affectionately patted Olma's shoulder a few times. Don't worry, as long as you don't leave Ice Stone City, no one will dare to do anything to you. Yes, Lord Viscounts. At this time, Olma also regained his composure. Because he knew that he had no other choice. Colin put away the letter and pointed at Cripple, who was standing to the side in a daze. This is Cripple. Later, tell him in detail the exact locations of the slave rebellions your Chamber of Commerce arranged around Ice Stone City. Yes. Of course, Olma nodded in response. Colin then looked at Cripple and ordered, Cripple, what I need you to do is very simple. Go to the locations of these slave rebellions and tell those rebels that there is food in Ice Stone City, a large amount of food. As long as you do this well, you don't have to work hard every day to earn points, and I can make you a free citizen. Yes, Lord. Even though Cripple didn't understand why Colin was doing this, he still responded loudly. In reality, Colin just wanted to obtain more cheap labor. These slave rebels were just a mob. If they were allowed to spread throughout the territory, they would only cause more damage. It was better to lure them all to Ice Stone City and then catch them all in one fell swoop. With a large amount of food, Colin wasn't worried that he couldn't settle these slaves down. He could make the slaves work without paying them a salary. As long as he gave them bread and meat soup that could barely fill their stomachs every day, they wouldn't cause trouble. If there were 10 free citizens every month, then the slaves would work even harder for Colin. Sigh, exploitation, it was just that simple. Of course, in a time of famine like this, someone like Colin who was willing to give the slaves food to eat was definitely a benevolent lord. Chapter 174. Almost every year during the Winter Veil Festival, it would snow, and this year was no exception. Early in the morning, Ice Stone City was already covered in heavy snow, and gusts of bone-piercing cold wind blew through the dark sky. In such terrible weather, the merciful Lord did not let the slaves go out to work. They all huddled together in the refugee camp that had just been built, relying on each other's body heat to stay warm. Suddenly, the camp became lively again, and all kinds of surprised shouts could be heard. This was because the merciful Lord had actually let the soldiers deliver wine to the slaves. Of course, the wine was not good wine, and it was also mixed with a large amount of water, but to most of the slaves who had never tasted wine in their entire lives, it was like nectar from heaven. The spicy wine dispelled the cold, and countless slaves prostrated themselves on the ground, loudly praising the Lord's benevolence. And at this moment, the merciful Lord was still lying in his warm bed. It was snowing heavily outside, but the inside was as warm as spring. The flames in the fireplace had been dancing all night, and the heat it emitted made the entire room exceptionally comfortable. Kathy quietly walked in and stuffed a few pieces of dry wood into the fireplace. Just as she was about to leave, she saw Colin sit up from the bed. "Sir, you're awake." Actually, Colin had woken up a long time ago, but lazing in bed on such a snowy morning was a kind of remembrance of his previous life's habits. "Happy Winter Veil Festival, Lord Viscounts. I'll go prepare some water for you to wash up and have breakfast." Kathy had specially dressed up today. She wore a white dress with a flouncy apron around her waist, and her long chestnut hair was tied up with a red headscarf, making her look simple yet elegant. Her watery eyes, pointy ears, and delicate facial features made her exude a delicate temperament. "Happy Winter Veil Festival." Colin smiled as he greeted the half-elf maid. Then he got off the bed and walked to the window, looking at the world covered in snow outside, his thoughts drifting. The Winter Veil Festival was a festival unique to the Radiant Empire. It lasted from the middle of December to the beginning of January every year, and was the biggest festival of the year. On the snowy ground in the castle, there were 3 children playing. They were all collateral members of the Angeli family. Colin was not familiar with them. It took him a while to remember the name of one of the boys. As for the other 2, he could not remember them at all. Listening to the innocent laughter of the children, an indescribable sense of loneliness suddenly welled up in Colin's heart. Colin suddenly pushed open the window. The biting cold north wind mixed with snowflakes blew in their faces, bringing with it an icy chill that seemed to penetrate deep into their bones and freeze their blood. However, Colin did not care at all. After being promoted to a 4th-grade knight, his heart, which had been dormant for a long time, suddenly burst with vitality and started beating again. This time, it was even more powerful and surging than before. Driven by this heart, all the blood in his body flowed and surged like a torrential river. The heat emitted from his body caused the snowflakes in the sky to melt into water before they even touched his skin. "Ah! Viscounts, why did you open the window? Be careful not to catch a cold." Kathy came in with toiletries and could not help but exclaim in surprise. Colin smiled and closed the window again. He turned back and let Kathy help him wash up. "Sir, do you want to have breakfast here or go to the dining hall? Let's eat here. Yes. Soon, Kathy came in with a tray. The breakfast was sumptuous. There was grilled tilapia, creamed tomatoes, almond gingerbread, and a cup of eggnog wine. However, Colin frowned. Eggnog wine? Didn't I tell you to prepare deer blood wine for every meal? Kathy explained in a low voice, Sir, this is the first meal of the Winter Veil Festival. According to tradition, there must be almond gingerbread and eggnog wine. Colin then remembered that it seemed to be true. Sir, if you insist, I can go to the kitchen to prepare a cup of deer blood wine. Forget it. Colin waved his hand. It was fine if he did not drink deer blood, he was too lazy to let the kitchen go through the trouble. When in Rome, do as the Romans do. Colin could use this food to experience the atmosphere of this world's Winter Veil Festival. How do you half-elves celebrate the Winter Veil Festival? Colin asked casually as he tasted the wonderful reaction of the gingerbread and eggnog wine in his mouth. Kathy, who was standing on the side, smiled. Actually, the half-elven kingdom's Winter Veil Festival is no different from the Empire. The only difference is that we have a bonfire party at night. Bonfire party? Yes, it can also be called a bonfire party, but the dancers are all male half-elves. They will show their talents at the party to attract the attention of the female half-elves. Won't they invite the female half-elves to dance with them? No, that is the custom of your human empire. The half-elves usually dance alone. At the end of the party, there will be a judge made up of respected elders to choose the male half-elves with the most beautiful dance. At this point, Kathy seemed to have recalled something, and her little face instantly turned red, making her look exceptionally adorable. Colin was speechless. The male with the most beautiful dance, this description gave Colin goosebumps all over his body. But as a gentleman, Colin suppressed the discomfort in his heart and smiled. Then what reward will the winner receive? He will receive the title of Moonlight Dancer. Kathy's eyes were full of envy and reverence, as if she yearned for this title. Colin nodded, suddenly becoming interested in the Moonlight Dancer. He wanted to see how beautiful their dance was. This custom of yours should have been passed down from the elves, right? Yes. Kathy nodded. Moreover, before the elves disappeared from the Radiant Moon Forest, there would be elven representatives participating in the Moonlight Dancer Selection Ball in Silvermoon City. Oh. Then, when did the elves completely cut off contact with you? Kathy muttered to herself for a moment before replying, I've seen the records of the Savoy family. Around 800 years ago, the elves completely disappeared from the depths of the Radiant Forest and never contacted us again. Colin had already finished the food in front of him. He picked up a napkin to wipe his mouth and asked curiously, have you half-elves never tried to enter the Radiant Moon Forest to look for traces of the elves? Of course we have. In the first few years after the elves disappeared, many half-elven nobles in Silvermoon City who had close ties with the elves panicked. They sent many rangers and soldiers to the Radiant Moon Forest in an attempt to find traces of the elves. But none of the half-elves who entered the Radiant Moon Forest ever came out. Never came out. Colin frowned. He suddenly felt that the disappearance of the elves wasn't that simple. That mysterious and dangerous Radiant Moon Forest should be hiding some unknown things. Chapter 175. It was late at night, and everything was quiet. Only the crackling sound of the firewood burning in the fireplace could be heard. Little White's body was curled up in front of the fireplace, and the fur on the side of its body was slightly yellow from being too close to the fireplace. Colin stretched and stood up from the mountain of government documents. I've seen the tax documents for the past few months. You've done a good job. The measures of reducing taxes to attract business are quite effective, and you can continue to implement them. Colin said to the tax official, Quincy, as he walked to the fireplace. He picked up the little cat that was greedy for the temperature of the flames and almost caught fire. He hugged it in his arms and then laid it down on the rattan chair in front of the fireplace. Meow, Little White made a sound of dissatisfaction, as if angry at the stupid human for disturbing its rest. But soon, it calmed down under Colin's caress, and lay on Colin's chest and closed its eyes again. Yes, Lord Viscounts. Your approval is my greatest honor. Quincy bowed to Colin and let out a sigh of relief. He obviously didn't expect Colin to be so patient and have the ability to understand the complicated tax documents. He was quite nervous before. Most of the nobles in this world didn't have the mind to manage the mundane affairs of the territory. They basically threw it to the stewards and tax officials to manage. They themselves were either immersed in pleasure, hung around with the noblewomen, or just wanted to show off their martial prowess. It was rare to see a lord like Colin who was willing to spend time on these boring government affairs. Quincy couldn't help but be 120% alert, reminding himself that he couldn't be careless in his work in the future. All right, it's getting late. Quincy, you should go back and rest. Yes, Lord Viscounts. After Quincy left, only Colin and Steward Eamon were left in the study. Colin stroked Little White's soft fur and said, "Today is the last day of the Winter Veil Festival, and the snow has stopped. From tomorrow onwards, let the slaves continue working." "Yes, master." "You let them rest for the entire Winter Veil Festival, which is already very benevolent." Colin's mouth twitched. He was still not used to the way the nobles of this world exploited their slaves. What are the next main tasks? Eamon flipped open the sheepskin scroll in his hands, and after checking it for a bit, he reported, "Master, the work in Icestone City has basically been completed. The next work is mainly to repair the Red Castle and the Water Conservancy project." Eamon paused and raised his head to look at Colin. Seeing that he had no objections, he continued, "This time, with a large amount of surplus labor, I plan to renovate the Red Keep. The warehouse, stables, training ground, and cellar also need to be expanded. This is the design plan that I asked someone to draft. Please take a look." Colin took the design and looked at it while asking, "How much is the budget for the renovation of the Red Castle?" "About 30,000 gold coins, master." Colin pondered for a moment and felt that the cost was still acceptable. The Angeli family's current financial situation was no longer as poor as it was half a year ago. Moreover, they had the support of the rich half-elves behind them, so Colin could also splurge a bit. Moreover, this time during the slave rebellion, Colin had gathered a large number of slaves. If he didn't make good use of this nearly free labor, then it would be too much of a pity. "All right, then we'll do it according to your plan." "Yes, master." Eamon nodded and then said, "As for the second project, the Water Conservancy project. My plan is to split it into two phases, the near and far. The near phase will be completed within 3 to 4 months. The main task is to divert water and irrigate it to serve the upcoming spring plowing. For the long term, it can be slowed down to 3 to 5 years. Dredging the river, strengthening the dam, expanding the irrigation system, all of these will take a longer time and cost a lot." Colin looked at the Water Conservancy project plan that Eamon handed over and nodded seriously. "This is worth doing. Water conservancy is the foundation of agriculture. Even if it costs a lot, it needs to be done well." "Yes, master." "Also, the half-elven kingdom has many experts in the field of agriculture. I want to hire some to come to Icestone City to instruct the slaves. I wonder if you can introduce me to them." "Of course, I will write a letter to Queen Aisha and have her send some people over." "Thank you, master." Eamon put away the parchment and hesitated for a moment before saying, "Master, recently more and more rebel soldiers have gathered in Icestone City. Although they can't withstand a single blow from the Black Cavalry, with so many slaves gathered in the city, I'm still a bit worried." Colin narrowed his eyes and asked faintly, "How many slaves do we have now?" "We just finished a count the day before yesterday. We currently have 85,000 slaves." That's quite a lot. However, it's not a big problem." Colin waved his hand carelessly, "As long as we give the slaves food to eat and let them see the hope of becoming free citizens, they won't rebel." Aemon still said worriedly, Master, there are many slaves and their backgrounds are complicated. We can't investigate them one by one. I'm worried that there will be people with bad intentions who will intentionally incite the slaves to rebel. Only then did Colin open his eyes, a serious expression on his face. How about this? There are two measures. After thinking for a moment, Colin ordered, first, let the slaves live together. Don't let the slaves who are familiar with each other stay together to prevent them from associating with each other. Secondly, we will implement a system of exposing and reporting. Anyone who finds someone suspicious in the slave gathering area or tries to mislead the public can take the initiative to report it. If the exposure is successful, the informant will receive a reward of 10 silver coins. Yes, Master. Colin picked up the coffee beside him and took a sip before asking, is there still no movement from Marquis Dawson and Count Oman? No. Aemon shook his head. Master, I'm guessing that they're waiting for winter to pass. After all, it's not a good time for war. Colin nodded, agreeing with Aemon's judgment. Moreover, they're probably waiting for the famine to fester. There's still more than half a year until the next autumn harvest. Right now, only the slaves at the lowest rung of society can't eat. When the commoners run out of food as well, I'm afraid the northern frontier will descend into even greater chaos. Master, the rumor you asked me to pay attention to before is becoming more and more intense. Even many citizens of Ice Stone City are beginning to believe that the reason the trolls were able to successfully invade the northern frontier was because of the Duke of St. Hilda's failed plan to lure the enemy. Has Frostwinter City not responded to this? Not at the moment. Colin couldn't help but frown. He didn't understand why the Duke of St. Hilda didn't come out to refute the rumor and instead allowed this rumor, which severely damaged his reputation, to spread freely in the northern frontier. Could it be that the Duke was seriously injured in the duel with the sacred samurai? Aemon saw that Colin's expression wasn't right and asked, Master, should we take action to stop this rumor from spreading in Ice Stone City? No need. Colin smiled and shook his head. Right now, our most important task is to strengthen ourselves. We don't need to care about other things. Just watch the show calmly. Yes, Master. Aemon nodded in response. Then, the old butler looked at the clock on the wall and reminded, Master, today is the last day of the Winter Veil Festival. It's almost midnight. We still need you to preside over the Angeli family's vigil ceremony. Colin finally remembered this matter and sighed helplessly. He stood up as if he was dealing with a chore and walked out. Dang dang dang, when the clock struck 12, Colin, who was presiding over the vigil, finally stopped praying. He raised his head and looked at the pitch-black night sky outside the window. The stars were lonely and the crescent moon was hazy. Thus, a brand new year had quietly arrived. Chapter 176. Knock, knock, knock. Steward Aemon knocked on the large oak door in front of him and reported, Master, Count Morrison requests an audience. Let him in. Colin's voice came from inside the door. Yes. Aemon pushed open the door and bowed to Count Morrison, indicating, Lord Count, please. Count Morrison smiled faintly at Aemon, then walked into the study with his head held high. Welcome to the Red Castle, Your Excellency Count Morrison. Colin walked up with a smile and warmly shook hands with Count Morrison. Sir Viscount Angley, thank you for your hospitality. I hope my arrival hasn't caused you too much trouble. This Count Morrison didn't look to be even 20 years old, even younger than Colin. Even though he tried his best to pretend to be mature and experienced, even growing a beard, his movements still revealed his obvious immaturity. Of course there's no trouble. It's my honor to have you grace Ice Stone with your presence. Also, I've always admired the valiant old Count. The old Count Colin spoke of was the previous Count Morrison, who was also the grandfather of the young man in front of him. This old Count had been stabbed to death by Knight Khan Sudo in a meeting of the lords half a year ago. At the time, Colin had also been present and had personally witnessed the scene of this unyielding old count loudly berating the lords who were preparing to revolt. After the old count's death, the Morrison family had no choice but to let such a young man inherit the count's position. The Morrison family didn't have many descendants. The old count only had one son, but this son had been seriously injured in a war many years ago and was almost completely paralyzed. A person like this who couldn't even take care of himself definitely couldn't inherit the Morrison family's title. Thus, the old count's eldest grandson, Sycan Morrison, who was only 18 years old, could only inherit the count's position. Thank you for your concern and praise. If grandfather knew that his sacrifice would receive so much recognition, he would definitely be able to rest in peace in the heavens. After exchanging some pleasantries, Colin invited Count Morrison to take a seat and had the maids serve coffee and desserts. Your Excellency Count, I wonder why you've come from so far away. Count Morrison put down the coffee in his hand and said seriously, Your Excellency Viscounts, I've taken the liberty of coming this time in hopes of receiving your help. Oh. Please speak. If it's within my power, I definitely won't be stingy, Colin said with a smile, already guessing Count Morrison's intentions in coming. Actually, after the winter veil, quite a few of the northern frontier nobles had come looking, wanting to buy a batch of food from Colin to deal with emergencies. This time around, Count Morrison was the one with the highest rank among the nobles. His next words confirmed Colin's suspicions. I heard that Your Excellency has purchased a large amount of food from Silvery Moon City. I wonder if you can sell some to the Morrison family. Of course. Count Morrison was pleasantly surprised by Colin's forthrightness, and he immediately shouted excitedly, Really? Thank you so much. Your Excellency Viscounts, the Morrison family will forever remember the kindness of the Angeli family. However, Your Excellency, I'm sure you're aware of the current price of food in the northern frontier. I'm afraid this batch of food won't be cheap. Count Morrison paused for a moment, but he still nodded. Don't worry, the Morrison family will not let a friend suffer a loss. We will buy this batch of food from you according to the market price. Hearing that, Colin couldn't help but reveal a satisfied smile. How could he suffer a loss? Given Colin's status in Silvery Moon, the local half-elven merchants naturally wouldn't dare to raise the price of the food. They sold it to Colin at the normal price. When this batch of food was shipped to the northern frontier, the price soared by more than 10 times. Colin could be said to have profited greatly. A few of the nobles who had come to buy the food had tried to lower the price after understanding the situation, but this young Count Morrison actually stupidly agreed without even discussing the price. It seemed that he was yet another honest person. Colin looked at Count Morrison and smiled even more brilliantly. Your Excellency, there's one more thing I need to tell you in advance. Please speak. I'm sure you're aware that too many people have come to Ice Stone to buy food. My food is all shipped from Silvery Moon, so I'm afraid I won't be able to keep up. That's why I'm afraid you won't be able to deliver all the food in one go. Count Morrison furrowed his brow slightly and asked, Then when will we receive all the food? That depends on the speed of delivery from Silvery Moon. However, I can promise you that the Morrison family will definitely get priority in the supply. All right, thank you so much, said Morrison with a smile. Unfortunately, the young count didn't realize that Colin hadn't actually given him any promises. What could a priority in the supply guarantee? Colin wasn't bullying Count Morrison on purpose. He had given this condition to all the nobles who came to buy food that they had to pay in installments. Using this condition, Colin could control the food supply of these families to a certain extent and influence their stance in the upcoming chaos of the northern frontier. Of course, the food would be delivered in installments, but the money had to be paid in one go. The Angeli family didn't accept credit. Right now, food was in short supply in the northern frontier. No matter how harsh Colin's conditions were, the nobles could only hold their noses and accept. Count Morrison didn't seem to realize Colin's hidden scheme at all as he thanked him profusely and left. Looking at his joyous appearance, a trace of guilt flashed through Colin's heart, but it only lasted for less than a second before disappearing. Not long after, Eamon knocked on the door again. "Master, another guest has come to Ice Stone." "Which family's messenger is it this time?" Eamon shook his head. "Master, the guest this time comes from the north." "The north?" Colin was stunned. Ice Stone was already the northernmost part of the northern frontier. Further north, that would be Sky Ice Plains. Troll's messenger? No, it's the messenger of the Golden Lion Legion stationed at Sky Ice Plains. Colin's brow furrowed even tighter. Golden Lion Legion? Are you sure he wants to see me? In Colin's opinion, the messenger of the Golden Lion Legion should have gone to Frostwinter no matter what. Why was he looking for him? Eamon lowered his voice and explained, "Master, the one who wants to see you is the follower of the Golden Lion Legion's messenger. His name is Charles St. Hilda." Charles? Colin immediately stood up from his seat in shock. He remembered that this was the eldest son of the Duke of St. Hilda, the former Marquis of the Northern Frontier. However, his father had sent him to the front lines and asked him to, "As long as we don't break through the troll capital, we're not allowed to return to the northern frontier." He didn't expect him to sneak back at this time. No wonder he didn't dare to go to Frostwinter and ran to Ice Stone instead. Colin paced around the study a few times with his brow furrowed. After a while, he asked, "No one recognized him, right?" "No, Master." Sir Charles disguised himself and appeared in Ice Stone as the messenger's follower. "All right, bring him to see me." Chapter 177. Honorable Viscount Angley, long time no see. You are even more elegant than before. When Colin saw the former Marquis of the Northern Frontier again, he almost didn't recognize him. In less than a year, Charles seemed to have become a completely different person. Without the arrogance and shrewdness of the past, the current Charles was exactly what a weather-beaten frontline knight should look like. Cold and serious. His attitude towards Colin had also completely changed. It was no longer the deliberate closeness he had in the past. Instead, it was somewhat distant. It was as if he was really a normal knight greeting the Lord of Ice Stone City. However, to be honest, it wasn't too strange for Charles to have such a change. The drastic change back then was enough to completely change a person's personality. "Sir Charles. I am so happy to see you in Ice Stone City." Colin smiled as he walked up to shake hands with Charles. The other's hand was somewhat cold. "Please, have a seat." "Thank you very much, Viscount Angley." Charles's excessive politeness made Colin slightly uncomfortable. Even if Charles was no longer the former Marquis of the Eastern Frontier, Colin still didn't dare to treat him as a normal knight just based on his surname. It must be difficult in Sky Ice Field right now. Come, drink some strong alcohol to get rid of the cold. As Colin spoke, he personally poured a cup of rum for Charles. Charles thanked him again and drank it in one gulp. Putting down the cup, Charles's expression was solemn as he said in a low voice, "Viscount Angley, I won't hide it from you. This time, I disobeyed my father's orders and secretly snuck back to the northern frontier. I hope this won't cause you too much trouble." "Of course not." Colin smiled and waved his hand. At the same time, he was curious what on earth made this duke's eldest son sneak back to find him. If it was the former Marquis Charles, perhaps he would have chatted with Colin for a long time to get to know him better, and then beat around the bush before telling him the reason for his visit. However, the current Charles, who had completely changed, didn't beat around the bush with Colin at all. "The reason I came to Ice Stone City this time is to warn you that the giant Devil Empire is restless and is attempting to mobilize their troops to invade the south. Once they head south again, the Golden Lion Legion won't be able to stop them with the few people we have on the front lines." Colin's eyes instantly focused, and his face became solemn. However, he wasn't too surprised. Now that the northern frontier was about to fall into chaos, it would be strange if the giant demon empire didn't make a move. Although the giant demon empire's main army had been completely annihilated by the Black Cavalry, this was a golden opportunity. Even if the giant demon emperor had to sell everything he had, he would still gather an army to fish in troubled waters on the northern frontier. Why did you tell me about this news? Shouldn't we inform your father? This was what Colin was really confused about. The envoys of the Golden Lion Legion will depart for chilly Winter Castle tomorrow to inform my father. However, a trace of pain flashed through Charles's eyes. However, with the current situation on the northern frontier, even if my father knows about this, it will be very difficult for him to mobilize troops to the Sky Icefield. Colin nodded silently, evidently agreeing with Charles's judgment. The House of St. Hilda was indeed very weak now, and they might not even be able to deal with the rebellious Marquis Dawson and Earl Oman. Furthermore, they still had to suppress the slave rebellion caused by the famine. How would they be able to mobilize troops to deal with the restless giant demons? Sir Charles, I can understand your concerns, but it is very difficult for me to provide you with much help. Uncle Garcia's Black Cavalry is in your hands, right? That's right. However, after the battle at Shadow Canyon and the great battle at Silvery Moon City, the Black Cavalry is only left with around 6,000 men. They are no longer as powerful as they were at their peak. That's enough, Charles said resolutely, his bright eyes staring fixedly at Colin as he continued. Don't you want to hear my suggestion? Colin hesitated for a moment before nodding. Please speak. Charles leaned forward slightly, and a fervent look appeared on his face as he said, I'm sorry. In order to obtain sufficient benefits from the impending civil strife on the northern frontier, the giant demon emperor has conscripted almost all of the remaining soldiers of the empire. I estimate that there will be around 100,000 of them. And their first stop south is very likely to be your Ice Stone City. Hearing this, Colin's brows furrowed slightly. However, he didn't refute it. This was because Ice Stone City's geographical location determined that it was very likely to be the first major city on the northern frontier that the giant demon army would attack. Seeing the change in Colin's expression, Charles hurriedly spoke faster. Therefore, Sir Viscounts, it will be very difficult for you to extricate yourself from this matter this time. My suggestion to you is that instead of passively defending, why don't you take the initiative to attack? Colin raised his eyebrows and finally spoke. How do I take the initiative to attack? Of course it's by relying on the Black Cavalry in your hands. Charles said patiently. This time, the giant demon empire has mobilized almost all of their soldiers, so the interior of the empire must be incomparably empty. Therefore, as long as you mobilize the Black Cavalry, with the cavalry's superior mobility, you can definitely sweep through the heart of the giant demon empire before the giant demon army reaches the northern frontier. You can even seize the opportunity to attack the giant demon imperial city and cut off the giant demon emperor's head. At that time, you can lead your army back in triumph and return to Ice Stone City before the giant demons reach the northern frontier. At that time, you just need to hang the giant demon emperor's head on the city walls, and the giant demon army will naturally disperse without attacking. After listening to Charles's suggestion, Colin fell into a long silence. Attacking from 1,000 miles away and directly attacking the root of the problem, this was a seemingly brilliant plan, but it also concealed an enormous risk. Moreover, Colin also realized that Charles's true intention behind this move was probably to borrow the power of the Black Cavalry to attack the giant demon imperial city. This way, he could wash away his humiliation and openly return to the northern frontier. Charles spoke again when he saw that Colin was silent. His tone was once again affectionate as he said, Colin, think about it carefully. How great of an honor is it to break into the Troll King's city? Even Marquis Garcia, who led the Black Cavalry at their peak, was unable to achieve such a result. Such a heaven-sent opportunity, such a monstrous achievement, is already at your fingertips. Think about it, as long as you can attack the giant demon imperial city, you will definitely become the hero of the northern frontier, no, even the entire Radiant Empire. It's more than enough to bestow you the title of Earl, and even the title of Marquis is not impossible. Looking at the fervent eyes of Charles, Colin also showed that he was moved, but he still cautiously said, "Charles, this plan of yours is of great importance, I still need to think about it carefully." "Of course. Then I'll wait for your good news." Charles was slightly disappointed, but he still forced a smile and said, "However, I estimate that the giant demons will send out their troops in the next 1 or 2 months, you'd better make a decision as soon as possible." "Okay." After sending Charles off, Colin paced back and forth in the room with a grave expression. To be honest, he was not that enthusiastic about Charles's plan. If it succeeded, the glory would be shared equally between the two of them, but if it failed, Colin would have to bear the bitter consequences alone. Only a fool would do such a loss-making business. Moreover, Colin had some doubts whether this plan was thought up by the Duke of St. Hilda, whose purpose was to drive Colin to help him remove the threat of the giant demons. If that was the case, then Colin was not willing to easily become a knife in the hands of the other party. Chapter 178. About 20 kilometers away from Ice Stone City, a simple but orderly campsite had been built. The campsite was built in an empty area beside a small lake, and the ground had been simply leveled. The bushes that were in the way had been cut down, but these bushes that had just been soaked in snow were still wet and couldn't be used as fuel, so they were sharpened and stuck into the ground to make a simple defensive fence. About 100 fully armed mercenaries patrolled around the campsite, and inside the campsite, there were dozens of even better equipped soldiers. From the flags they raised, it could be seen that these soldiers were the Oman family's private army. In the center of the campsite, a knight in silver armor was warming himself next to a bonfire. He wasn't wearing a helmet, revealing a handsome young face with blue eyes and black hair. His thin lips were tightly pursed, making him look determined and calm. Light footsteps sounded, and the knight turned around to see his wife walking over. "Vala, it's so late, aren't you going to sleep?" Caitlin opened her sleepy eyes and came to the bonfire, leaning on her husband's broad shoulder. "I'll keep watch for a while, you go sleep first." Knight Vala had a doting smile on his face as he rubbed his wife's hair. Then I'll accompany you, I'm actually not sleepy." Caitlin couldn't help but yawn as she said she wasn't sleepy. Vala shook his head with a smile, "Go sleep, we should be able to reach Ice Stone City tomorrow." "Don't look so haggard then, otherwise Viscount Angley will probably blame me for not taking good care of his sister." The corner of Caitlin's lips curled up slightly. "Colin isn't that petty." Vala was about to persuade her again, but he suddenly seemed to have sensed something, and all the muscles in his body instantly tensed up. Caitlin also felt the change in her husband, and asked in confusion, "What's wrong?" "Someone's coming." Vala helped his wife up, and then quickly put on his helmet and sword. At this moment, the alarm indeed echoed in the campsite, and there were also the panicked cries of the mercenaries, "Rebels, the rebels are coming." "Rebels?" Caitlin's face was filled with panic, and she held her husband's arm tightly as she asked worriedly, "Will it be okay?" "Don't worry, it's just a bunch of starving slaves. Kill the ones at the front, and the rest will run on their own." Vala comforted her with a relaxed expression. "Still, you have to be careful." "All right." After comforting his wife, Knight Vala strode forward, and used his sword to hit his shield, making banging sounds as he shouted loudly. "Don't panic. Formation. Face the enemy." Under Knight Vala's orders, the guards of the Oman family quickly formed a battle formation and gathered around the knight, looking at the slaves swarming in from outside the camp with a solemn expression. The performance of the mercenaries was a bit worse. When they saw the large number of slaves swarming over, they were suddenly scared to the point that their hands and feet turned to jelly, not knowing what to do. "Archers, fire!" Knight Vala ordered. A rain of arrows was shot out from the campsite, and although it wasn't dense, it still caused quite a bit of damage to the unprotected slaves. After 3 rounds of arrow rain, the slaves had already reached the fence. Knight Vala raised his giant shield in front of him and roared. "Raise your shields. Advance. Under Knight Vala's lead, the Oman family's guards were like a sharp knife, stabbing deeply into the rebel army, and the slaves were unable to resist at all. The difference in equipment, martial arts, and battle intent was too great, and these starving slaves were no match for the Oman family's guards. Knight Vala was bathed in golden holy light, and the slaves screamed and screamed as he killed, and ran away like rats. His bravery also woke the mercenaries up from their dreams, and they all yelled as they joined in the battle. The rebel army, who had the advantage in numbers, was forced to retreat. At the back of the rebel army, Cripple looked at his companions who couldn't even withstand a single blow, and disdain flashed through his heart. However, he still spoke respectfully to the slave leader beside him. "Sir, there are knights in this campsite, and I'm afraid we won't be able to take it down. We should retreat, and Ice Stone City is our true destination." The slave leader's expression changed, and he said angrily, "A bunch of trash, you can't even take down a campsite with so few people, how are you going to take Ice Stone City?" Cripple hurriedly explained, "Sir, you don't have that many troops in your hands right now. Only by meeting up with the other rebel forces in Ice Stone City will we have a chance to take down Ice Stone City." The slave leader's expression changed rapidly, and when he looked up and saw the terrifying scene of Knight Vala's massacre, his entire body trembled, and he reluctantly ordered, "Retreat." After the rebel army received the order to retreat, it was as if they had been pardoned, and in the blink of an eye, not a single one was left. Under the cover of the night, many of the slaves actually lost their way and got separated from the main group. The slave leader didn't have the mind to count his losses, and directly led the retreating slaves back to Ice Stone City. The slave leader, who was immersed in the unwillingness of his failure, didn't notice that the slave called Cripple had disappeared from the group at some point. When the morning sun dispersed the fog in the forest, the Oman family's troops once again set off. After last night's battle, Knight Vala's reputation in the group had greatly increased. Those who originally looked at her with disdain because of her lowly status as an illegitimate child now looked at her with reverence. Although one's background was important, strength was also a commonly used name card in this world. The troop didn't move quickly, and it wasn't until the sun set in the west that they could see the tall walls of Ice Stone City. However, at this moment, a bloody massacre was taking place under the walls of Ice Stone City. Countless rebel slaves gathered under the city walls like ants, and seemed to be attacking the city. They had built a dozen or so extremely crude wooden ladders, and were climbing up the city walls with all their might. However, Knight Vala, who had been on the battlefield for a long time, could tell at a glance that the defenders were clearly not using their full strength. It was as if they were worried that if they used too much strength, they would scare away all the gathered slaves. However, even if the defenders had already retracted their strength, the slaves' attack was still chaotic and completely disorganized. Their own people were even fighting over the wooden ladders, and most of the slaves just stood under the city walls with blank expressions, randomly howling a few times, not knowing what they should be doing at all. The dozen or so slave leaders gathered together, and when they saw the chaotic situation in front of them, they were also somewhat helpless. They had never received military education, so how could they know how to attack a city? Just as the slave leaders were getting more and more anxious, the city gates of Ice Stone City suddenly opened. The slaves were stunned for a dozen or so seconds, and then suddenly cheered, all of them surging towards the open city gates. However, before they could celebrate for long, the ground suddenly began to tremble. Along with the flying corpses and splattering blood, the black-armored cavalry shot out of the city gate like sharp arrows, completely scattering the slave army. Seeing all this, Knight Vala shook her head with a smile, and turned to order, "Caitlin, you stay here with the mercenaries. I will lead the family guards to help." "All right." Chapter 179. While the battle outside the city was in full swing, Colin was hiding in the gloomy basement of the Red Fort. Of course, he wasn't hiding here. The slave rebels outside couldn't scare him. Let alone scare him, they couldn't even attract Colin's attention. In the beginning, Colin personally went to the top of the city wall to supervise the battle, but after seeing the slave rebels' wonderful siege methods, Colin was no longer interested in watching the battle. At this time, Colin wasn't alone in the basement. There were nearly 100 figures standing in front of him. These figures were uniformly wearing steel masks that covered their faces, only revealing eyes without a trace of human emotion. These were, of course, the blood slaves that Colin had transformed. In addition to the Fox Knight and the Monkey Ranger, the newly added 85 horse-masked blood slaves were, of course, professionals selected from the captives of the Sky Horse Legion. 2 4th-grade knights, 8 3rd-grade knights, 5 4th-grade warriors, 17 3rd-grade warriors, and 53 1st-grade and 2nd-grade professionals. In order to transform so many blood slaves, Colin gritted his teeth until they were sore. He almost developed a psychological shadow over his neck. But fortunately, the results were remarkable. At present, it seemed that Colin's blood slave death squad was beginning to take shape. Colin had high hopes for this blood slave death squad. Their target was the Temple Knights of the Radiance Church. It was said that the Temple Knights were a terrifying legion composed entirely of knights. Although there were only 3,000 of them, their terrifying fighting strength was enough to make all the legions of the Radiance Empire pale in comparison. This was also the most powerful military force controlled by the Radiance Church. Of course, Colin's blood slave death squad couldn't be compared to the Temple Knights in terms of quantity or quality. But there was still a long way to go. Colin believed that one day, his blood slave death squad would become a powerful legion that could contend against the Temple Knights. Colin's gaze swept across the 87 blood slaves one by one, and finally stopped at the Monkey Ranger. He ordered, "Monkey, go to the Troll Empire." The Monkey Ranger nodded without a word, and then walked out. Colin stroked his chin and pointed at a horse-masked knight. He ordered, "You go with them." The news brought by Charles made Colin worry about the troll army that was about to head south. However, he still wanted to see the situation of the Troll Empire with his own eyes. Of course, he definitely couldn't make a trip to the giant Devil Empire himself at this time, so he could only let the blood slaves do it for him. After entering rank 4, Colin discovered that his control over the blood thralls had also increased by a level. Whatever the blood thrall saw and heard, as long as he willed it, he could see and hear everything at the same time. It was as if he had multiple clones of himself. Moreover, the distance limit he could control the blood thralls seemed to have disappeared as well. Before rank 4, Colin could only give orders to the blood thralls within 3 to 4,000 meters. But after rank 4, there seemed to be no distance limit. Back then, he purposely left a blood thrall in Silvermoon City, and then returned to Ice Stone City himself. When he arrived at Ice Stone City, he discovered that he could still control the blood thralls that were thousands of kilometers away. After that, Colin arranged for 3 more blood thralls to go to Winter City, Fallen Eagle City, and Iron Furnace City respectively to monitor the movements of the House of St. Hilda, the Oman family, and the Dawson family. These were all the main characters of the northern frontier that was about to begin, so Colin naturally had to pay more attention to them. After arranging everything, Colin left the basement. He had just taken a few steps when he met Knight Roger in the corridor. "Lord Viscounts, the rebellion outside the city has been quelled. Preliminary statistics show that we captured more than 12,000 slaves this time. 38 of the Black Cavalry were severely injured in this battle, and 3 others unfortunately died in battle." Colin frowned and asked, "These casualties should be caused by the new recruits, right?" "Yes." Only then did Colin feel relieved. Recently, he had ordered Knight Seal to train 1,000 new recruits into the Black Cavalry. Taking advantage of the slave rebellion this time, he could let them see some blood. However, from the casualties this time, the combat strength of the new recruits still needed to be improved. However, elite cavalry was definitely not something that could be trained in a short period of time. This kind of thing could not be rushed. He could only hope that these new recruits could quickly grow under the leadership of the Black Cavalry veterans. Treatment and compensation will be carried out as usual. I won't say anything else. Yes, my lord. Knight Roger nodded in response, then reported, My lord, we also encountered a group of guards from the Oman family outside the city. The leader claimed to be your brother-in-law, Knight Vala. They're here already. Colin was slightly surprised. Calculating the itinerary, Colin estimated that Vala and the others should have set off for Ice Stone City right after the Winter Veil Festival. He didn't know if his sister Caitlin really missed him, or if Knight Vala was ordered by Count Oman to come and rope in the Angeli family. Welcome them into the city. I'll wait for them in the reception hall. Yes. Just as Colin was playing with Whitey, hurried footsteps could be heard outside the hall. Soon, Caitlin's figure appeared in Colin's line of sight. When she saw Colin, an unconcealable joy appeared on her face. She lifted her skirt with both hands and quickly walked over, hugging her brother in her arms. Colin, I heard that you fought with the Eastern Army in Silvermoon City. I was so scared. You're not hurt, are you? I'm fine, sister. Colin patted Caitlin's back a little helplessly. However, this feeling of being remembered by a family member was pretty good, even if Colin had always been a little estranged from Caitlin. Breaking free from his sister's embrace, Colin looked at Knight Vala who was walking towards him. From the memories of his predecessor, he knew that Colin used to have a very good relationship with Vala. As he was the man who loved his sister dearly, Colin used to love her and her dog, so he was also very close to Knight Vala. And because of Vala's identity as an illegitimate child, she was looked down upon by the Oman family, but she found a rare warmth in front of her brother and sister in Grey Castle. Therefore, after marrying Caitlin, Vala actually spent more time in Grey Castle town than in Falling Eagle City. It could be said that Knight Vala was basically a knight of the Angeli family, except for the fact that she didn't officially swear allegiance to Baron Angeli. It was also because of this that Knight Vala took the initiative to follow Baron Angeli to the front lines when he led the army. However, after going through so many things, when Knight Vala saw Colin again, other than joy in her eyes, there was also lingering worry and guilt. She opened her mouth, but for a moment, she didn't know how to greet this Viscount Angeli who had a completely different temperament from the past. Colin still had a smile on his face, as if everything that happened in the past year had already been thrown to the back of his mind. He gave Knight Vala a warm hug and said, Vala, I heard from Knight Roger that you gave me a big gift when you just arrived in Ice Stone City. Lord Viscounts, if you're talking about the battle outside the city, then I really don't dare to claim credit for it. The guards I brought this time at most helped to intercept some rebels, it really can't be considered a big gift. Ha, you're too polite. Also, don't be so formal, call me Colin. Vala looked at Colin's sincere smile and seemed to finally relax. She smiled as well. All right, Colin. Chapter 180. When Colin brought his sister and brother-in-law to the dining hall, a feast of turkey had already been prepared. On the long and narrow oak table, there was a huge roasted turkey, which was overflowing with the aroma of oil. Around it were all kinds of side dishes, such as roasted bacon, mashed potatoes, vegetable soup, fruit salad, and a bottle of white wine from Winst Manor. Of course, Colin's exclusive deer blood wine was also included. Colin tied the napkin and said to Eamon, who was pouring wine for the three of them, Eamon, sit down and eat with us. Eamon said awkwardly, Master, this is against the rules. Colin waved his hand domineeringly, in this castle, I am the rules. Sit. Eamon was still hesitating, but Caitlin persuaded, Eamon, sit down. You have served the Angeli family for more than 40 years. We are already family. Eamon thanked her and sat down. Colin then looked at Kathy who was standing at the side and said with a smile, Kathy, why don't you join as well? Kathy's little face immediately lit up with joy. She quickly thanked him and sat down. Caitlin looked at the pretty half-elf maid and frowned slightly. She had obviously misunderstood the relationship between Colin and Kathy, and was planning to remind her brother in private. Half-elves could only be taken as lovers, and could not be married. Even if she was said to be a descendant of the half-elf royal family. This could be considered a form of racial discrimination. However, the nobles of the Radiant Empire had long since taken it as a matter of course. This was also the arrogance of the Radiant Empire, which occupied the center of the continent and suppressed all the other races. The nobles of the Radiant Empire also had the tradition of eating without talking when they were enjoying their meals. As for the dessert after the main meal, it was specially prepared for chatting. Tonight's dessert was a fresh fruit Cabernet Sauvignon. It was a delicacy made with egg, cream, and champagne poured over various fruits. After a simple roasting, it emitted a rich charred aroma that instantly filled the entire restaurant. After preparing the desserts, Eamon and Kathy sensibly excused themselves, leaving the rest of the reunion to Colin and Vala. Caitlin was very excited as she chattered about all the interesting things that happened between the three of them in Greycastle. Vala and Colin added in from time to time, filling the entire dining hall with a cheerful atmosphere. But as time went by, Caitlin, who had just finished a long journey, was visibly tired. She began to yawn repeatedly. Seeing this, Vala said considerately, "Caitlin, why don't you go back and rest first? I'll talk to Colin for a while." "Alright, I'm too tired today. I'll go back to sleep first. You guys take your time." Colin also smiled and nodded. "Okay, sister. The maid outside the hall will take you to your room." When the door to the hall opened and closed again, the dining hall suddenly became quiet. A hint of awkwardness began to circulate in the air. The two men picked up the wine glasses in front of them almost at the same time and brought them to their mouths. Colin finished the dear blood wine in his glass in one gulp and then looked at Vala, as if waiting for her to speak first. In Colin's opinion, Vala had come to Ice Stone this time because she had received orders from Count Aldman to rope in the Angeli family. Caitlin had already helped to set up the atmosphere earlier. Now, it should be time for Vala's performance. "Colin." Vala spoke as expected. "Actually, ever since I followed the Baron to battle, I've been too ashamed to see you." "Why?" "Because I didn't fulfill my duty, causing the Baron to unfortunately die on the front lines." The sorrow and self-blame in Vala's eyes were completely flawless. At least, Colin couldn't find any flaws. What was the situation back then? At the time, the Baron was leading the family's army to carry out a rescue mission, but halfway through, he was surrounded by a troll army that was several times larger than ours. The battle was extremely fierce. The soldiers around him fell one by one, and my ears were filled with screams. Then, I saw the Baron's head, cut off by a troll warrior with my own eyes. Vala took a deep breath, as if to calm her agitated emotions. After a while, she continued her narration. "After that, I was also stabbed in the stomach. Before I lost consciousness, I only remember the savage smile of the troll warrior who defeated me." After listening to Vala's narration, Colin nodded expressionlessly. There was no joy or anger in his eyes as he asked calmly, "So you were captured just like that?" Vala hesitated for a moment, then said in an uncertain tone, "I think so." "Think so?" Actually, I don't remember what happened after I was injured. I only know that when I woke up again, I was already in Fallen Eagle City." Colin finally sat up straight. Because he realized that something was wrong. That wasn't what Manager Oliver of the Tulip Merchant Guild said back then. When that fatty gave Colin an expensive enchanted armor as an apology, he clearly said, Vala became a captive after her defeat, and was brought back to the Troll Empire by the Troll Army. However, when she was chased by the Black Cavalry, she was abandoned by the Trolls along with 50,000 other human captives on the icy plains. In the end, she only managed to return to the northern frontier after going through untold hardships. That explanation didn't match Vala's words at all. What's going on? Both sides didn't match up. She wouldn't make such a low-level mistake, right? Thus, Colin decided to test her again. Vala, that's not what Manager Oliver of the Tulip Merchant Guild told me back then. Oliver? Vala frowned. He probably received my mother's instructions to fabricate some things for me in front of you. Colin blinked, clearly not used to Vala's honesty. Your mother? Lady Penny? Why would she help you fabricate a story? Mother, she. Vala looked conflicted and pained, but she still said softly, she might want to hide something. Hide what? Colin continued to ask. Vala looked up and looked at Colin seriously, complicated emotions flashing in her eyes. After a long while, she spoke again, I suspect that Mother might have a secret connection with the trolls. What? Colin was shocked. That shock wasn't an act. Colin obviously knew that Vala's mother, Penny, had a secret connection with the trolls. It wasn't just her, Count Aldman was the same. But what shocked him was that Vala actually admitted it herself. However, what Vala said next shocked Colin even more. Colin, I heard that you encountered an assassination in Grey Castle. Yes, Knight Carter did it. Do you know who ordered Knight Carter to do this? Who? My mother. Colin stared blankly at Knight Vala, completely dumbfounded. At that moment, he was cursing wildly in his mind. Bro, did you get the wrong script? Chapter 181. The dining hall was dimly lit, and a cold wind that came out of nowhere blew at the candlelight. The flickering candlelight shone on the faces of the two knights at the long table, making them look gloomy and depressing. After a long while, Colin finally snapped out of his daze from Vala's unexpected words. He stared at his brother-in-law, as if trying to discern if he was being honest with him or if he had other motives. As if seeing Colin's disbelief, Vala explained again. Actually, I was just as shocked as you when I first found out about this. Furthermore, I didn't dare tell Caitlin about it until now. How did you find out about this? I started to have suspicions after returning from the battlefield. Just as I told you, I only remember being stabbed by a troll warrior, but when I woke up, I was already in Fallen Eagle City. I've been trying to figure out what happened in between. I once asked my mother, but she told me that the people from the Tulip Merchant Guild saw me abandoned on the battlefield, so they saved me. But this explanation obviously didn't convince me. So, I went to check the trade records of the Tulip Merchant Guild, and there, I found that a merchant group did indeed return to Fallen Eagle City from the front lines during the time I was injured. It should be this merchant group that brought me back, but the timing was too coincidental, so coincidental that it was hard to believe that it wasn't deliberately arranged. So, you suspect that Madame Penny has a secret relationship with the trolls? Yes. Of course, I might be overthinking it. My mother might not have betrayed the interests of the northern frontier. After all, the Tulip Merchant Guild has always been doing business between the Troll Empire and the northern frontier, so it's inevitable that they would have some connections with the higher-ups of the trolls. Perhaps they really happened to pass by the battlefield and redeemed me. Vala defended his mother, but judging from his expression, even he didn't believe his own explanation. Colin sneered inwardly. Your mother's connection with the trolls is deeper than you think. But on the surface, he nodded in agreement, then continued to ask, then what about Knight Carter's assassination attempt on me? Why do you think that it was your mother's doing? Vala paused, seemingly hesitant, but after struggling for a moment, she still said, the merchant group that brought me back from the front lines actually passed by Grey Castle town. Moreover, it was the day before you were assassinated. Oh. Colin's eyes flashed, but that doesn't mean anything, does it? I've checked the account book of that caravan. It was recorded that a set of expensive enchanted armor was stolen, and the place where it was stolen was Grey Castle town. Then, Colin came to a realization. How was this a theft? It was clearly a payment to Knight Carter as a commission for the assassination. No wonder Vala suspected that her mother was the mastermind. Then why do you think your mother sent someone to assassinate me? It should be for the Angeli family. Vala didn't dare to meet Colin's gaze, the shame on her face so thick that it almost covered her entire face. Baron Carter died at the front lines, and if you die as well, then Caitlin will become the first heir to the Angeli family's title, and I will also obtain a family property, and won't have to be looked down upon all day in Fallen Eagle City. Perhaps, this is my mother's plan. I'm sorry, Colin, I've let you down. Vala's honesty left Colin at a loss for how to respond. Originally, he already had a perfect plan for this banquet. He was prepared to use the conclusion he had deduced from the Red Eye inheritance to make Vala believe that he was the true son of Count Oman, thus provoking her to hate the Viscounts of Lawrence and planting an unstable bomb within the Oman family. But who would have thought that things would turn out like this? As his mind raced, Colin suddenly felt that he had to change his way of thinking. Vala, my father didn't care about your illegitimate identity and treated you as his own, even marrying my sister to you. But you failed to protect my father and let him die tragically on the battlefield, while you lived on alone. Can such actions be considered the virtue of a knight? Before Vala could speak, Colin continued to press her. Your mother actually ordered an assassin to kill me in order to obtain a family property for you. Do you think you can get my forgiveness with a simple sorry? Vala's face flushed red in shame at Colin's questioning. She suddenly got up and left her seat, arriving in front of Colin and kneeling on one knee, at the same time holding the sword at her waist above her head with both hands. Viscount Angley, it is only right that I accept your judgment. Colin raised an eyebrow and sneered, what? Vala, do you think I won't kill you just because you married my sister? No. My crimes have nothing to do with Caitlin, and I don't expect you to forgive me for her sake. Vala's face was resolute, and his hands holding the sword did not tremble at all. Actually, when I found out about my mother's actions, I already knew that only death can redeem my sins to Baron Angeli and to you. She then raised her head and looked at Colin with a calm expression, and said word by word, Colin, please grant me release. Colin stared at Vala's eyes expressionlessly, as if trying to discern the sincerity in her words. Vala's blue eyes were as calm and deep as the surface of a windless sea. After a long while, Colin finally got up slowly. Clang, he unsheathed his long sword and pressed it against Vala's heart. Colin used a bit of force, and the sharp tip of the sword easily pierced through her thin outer clothes. Fresh blood dyed Vala's chest red, but his eyes did not tremble at all, and his body did not dodge at all. Colin narrowed his eyes and asked expressionlessly, Vala, do you have any last words? Vala's eyes finally rippled, and there was a hint of longing in his voice. Please take good care of Caitlin, and help her find a good man to remarry. She's my sister, and I'll take good care of her even if you don't ask. Vala nodded, as if she was finally relieved. She slowly closed her eyes and waited for death to descend upon her. Colin hesitated for a moment, but still slowly stabbed the long sword into Vala's chest. He was not fast, and it seemed like he was purposely controlling his strength so that the long sword pierced into Vala's chest bit by bit. Throughout the entire process, Vala did not have any intention of dodging other than clenching his teeth in pain and trembling out of reflex. It was only when the long sword completely pierced through her chest and came out of her back that Vala slowly opened her eyes and looked at the world with nostalgia, and said softly to Colin, I'm sorry. She then slowly slumped to the ground. Colin sighed, as if finally confirming Vala's sincerity. He had seen too many old schemers who would do anything for their own benefits, and a knight like Vala who was willing to atone for her sins with her death for the sake of justice in her heart was an anomaly. Colin sighed again as he looked at Vala, who was on the verge of death with a long sword pierced through his chest. In the end, she still bit him. Chapter 182. The blood mist dissipated. Colin returned to his seat. Vala was a grade 3 knight, and according to Colin's experience of transforming Queen Aisha, embracing a bloodline that was lower in rank should not cause him to lose a rank. He quietly felt the changes in his body, and apart from feeling a little weak, he did not lose a rank. Heaving a sigh of relief, Colin poured himself another cup of dear blood wine, drinking it as he waited for Vala to wake up. To be honest, Vala's willingness to atone for his sins with his death had touched Colin greatly. Facing such a knight who held fast to the justice in his heart, Colin felt that he had to slightly change his original plan. After a long while, just as Colin was about to come up with a new plan, Vala finally woke up. I'm not dead. Vala sat up straight, looking at the long sword that was still stuck in his chest with a blank expression. You are indeed dead, Colin said calmly, but I have granted you a second life. Vala stared blankly at Colin. In her eyes, Colin's entire body seemed to be shrouded in a vast, holy, and irresistible radiance, causing people to have the urge to prostrate themselves in worship. Colin. What is going on? Have you heard of the Blood Angels? After a round of brainwashing, Vala's attitude toward Colin became extremely respectful. He slowly pulled out the long sword in front of his chest, raised it above his head, and knelt on one knee, solemnly swearing an oath. Thank you, God's chosen one, for your supreme grace. I, Vala Oman, hereby swear my loyalty to you. From this day onwards, until I return to the embrace of the Lord, I will serve you at all times. Your will shall be the direction of my sword, and your orders shall be the creed of my actions. Colin took Vala's sword and tapped his shoulder twice, accepting the knight's oath of loyalty. With the knight's previous display of loyalty to the virtues of a knight, Colin felt that this oath of loyalty might be even more reliable than the bonds of the blood breeds. Vala, do you know why I forgive your sins and grant you a second life? God's chosen one, please instruct us. Because you are just a pitiful person who has been kept in the dark. Vala's face was filled with confusion. Colin continued to explain, you said that your mother, Penny, sent someone to assassinate me because she wanted to help you obtain a family business. Then let me ask you, is your relationship with Ms. Penny really that close? Mother. Vala hesitated. Mother is not someone who is good at expressing her feelings. Colin sneered, not good at expressing feelings. Do you really think that a mother would not know how to be intimate with her own son? Maybe she's a little conflicted about my identity as an illegitimate child, she's just a rank 1 commoner. What right does she have to look down on an illegitimate child? Even if she was conflicted about your identity and was unwilling to get close to you, why would she take such a huge risk to help you obtain the Angeli family's business? Vala did not know what to say now, and could only say respectfully, God's chosen one, please forgive my stupidity for not being able to see the reason. Actually, the real reason is very simple. Colin exuded a faint aura of might, and his tone became solemn. Penny is not close to you because she's not your biological mother. What? Vala looked up in shock, and looked at Colin in disbelief. Don't forget that I am the Blood Angel's apostle. Naturally, I can use divine spells to tell that you are actually a direct descendant of the Oman family, and that Lawrence is actually the illegitimate child of Penny and the Count. I'm my father's son. Vala was completely dumbfounded. Lawrence is the illegitimate child? Colin leisurely swirled the wine glass in his hand, and did not continue speaking. Instead, he let Vala digest this shocking news. The reason why he did not mention recessive inheritance was that compared to the unproven genetic theory of this world, profound divine spells were more likely to gain the trust of a devout knight. Vala indeed fell into a deep struggle because of Colin's words. He did not dare to question Colin's judgment, but he could not understand why he had been treated as an illegitimate child all these years if he really was Count Oman's son. Are you puzzled as to why you, a direct descendant, would be raised as an illegitimate child? Yes, please enlighten me, God's chosen one. Because even though Lawrence is an illegitimate child, his bloodline is nobler than yours. How? How is that possible? Vala was even more puzzled, but soon seemed to understand something. He quickly asked, you mean that Lawrence's birth mother, Penny, is not a commoner? That's right. Penny is actually a descendant of the House of St. Theon. Therefore, even though Lawrence is an illegitimate child, he is obviously nobler than you in Count Oman's eyes. The House of St. Theon. Vala finally understood. A descendant of a holy knight family was naturally nobler than him. It was only then that Vala understood why Penny was always so cold to him, completely lacking the closeness and attention that a normal mother should have. Knight Vala fell silent after understanding the whole story. His expression kept changing as the years of humiliation due to his identity as an illegitimate child suddenly surged into his heart, finally condensing into a lingering resentment and unwillingness. Colin's lips curled up slightly as he provoked again, "Vala, do you know about cuckoos?" "Yes." Vala nodded with a gloomy expression. Cuckoos lay their eggs in the nests of sparrows, allowing the sparrows to raise their own offspring. Then what will happen to the real offspring of the sparrows? They will be squeezed out of the nest by the hatched cuckoos, falling to their deaths, starving to death. Vala's expression was so gloomy that it looked like water could drip from it. Then, Vala, are you willing to see Lawrence take over the title of count that should have belonged to you, and let the Oman family become a breeding ground for the descendants of the House of St. Theon? Of course not. And that Countess of the Sudor family, your real mother, is said to have died of an illness. Ha, do you believe that reason? Vala's eyes reddened as he squeezed out 2 words from his tightly clenched teeth. No. And your father, Count Oman? I can tell you with certainty that the reason why the trolls were able to defeat Marquis Charles's army, causing my father to die on the front lines and you to be heavily injured, was actually because he secretly leaked information to the trolls. Moreover, this time, in order to help the House of St. Theon make a comeback, Count Oman chose to betray his own lord and his own people once more, wholeheartedly wanting to cause chaos on the northern frontier. Are you still willing to serve such a person and be ordered around by him? Of course not. Vala's veins bulged as he clenched his fists. He suddenly looked up and asked sincerely, Lord Chosen One, what should I do? Hearing this, a satisfied smile finally appeared on Colin's face. Chapter 183. Winter in the northern frontier was always exceptionally long. Even at the end of February, the heavy snow and howling cold winds still showed no signs of abating. The spring that many people were looking forward to was nowhere to be seen. Ice Stone City, city gates. Colin, you can stop here. Caitlin reached out to hug her brother and even helped him fix the collar of his shirt. She reminded him, when you're free, you must come visit me at Eagle Fall City. Of course, of course. Colin nodded with a chuckle. You must be careful on the way as well. Knight Vala bowed solemnly to Colin. Lord Viscounts, don't worry. I will protect Caitlin well. Also, I will pass on the words you told me to Lord Father. You must let the Lord Count feel my goodwill. The friendship between the Angeli family and the Oman family will last forever. Colin said seriously. Yes. The two of them exchanged a tacit glance and finally waved goodbye. After sending off Vala and her husband, Colin had just returned to the Red Castle. Before he could sit down and rest, he saw butler Eamon hastily walk over. Master, there's another letter from Pine Town. Colin received it with a frown. He opened the letter and scanned through it. Then, he actually laughed in anger. Ha! This Baron Lamba, he really isn't going to let this slide. Pine Town was located to the west of Ice Stone City and was Baron Lamba's territory. This Baron Lamba had once asked Colin to buy food. However, he wasn't as easy to get rid of as the young and immature Count Morrison. He haggled with Colin for a long time and annoyed Colin so much that they almost parted on bad terms. Although he finally accepted Colin's condition of paying in installments, he was obviously very dissatisfied with the result. As the news of Ice Stone City having enough food spread, the slaves in the vicinity flooded into Colin's territory and provided a large amount of labor for Colin. On the other hand, the surrounding territories of the Viscounts began to show signs of population loss. At first, they were only slaves. But later, as the famine deepened, the high price of food made it impossible for many commoners to afford food. These civilians who had run out of food also began to pack up their belongings and head towards Ice Stone City with their families. Of course, Colin didn't refuse anyone. He was well aware of the importance of population in this era, and Ice Stone City, which possessed a large amount of food, could continue to receive an influx of people. However, this obviously made the surrounding lords anxious. However, although they were anxious, they did not dare to do anything to Colin. After all, the Black Cavalry was in Ice Stone City. Although they were only remnants of an army, they were still not something that the surrounding minor lords could fight against. What's more, Colin had just defeated the famous Pegasus Legion in the Battle of Silvermoon City. Many people regarded him as the next rising star of the northern frontier after Marquis Garcia. Of course, there were always fools in this world who did not know the immensity of heaven and earth. For example, Pine Forest Town's Baron Lamba. He had sent letters many times asking why Colin had taken in his citizens and even requested that Colin return all of Pine Forest Town's citizens. This attitude clearly angered Colin. Casually tearing up the letters and throwing them into the fireplace, Colin turned around and ordered Eamon, "Write a letter for me. Help me draft a reply letter. Tell Baron Lamba that I can't recognize any of the citizens of Pine Forest Town. If he wants his citizens back, then he has to personally come to Ice Stone City." "Yes, master." Just as Eamon was about to leave, he was stopped by Colin. "Wait, is there still no news from Winter City?" "None. It is said that the Duke of St. Hilda was injured in the duel with the paladins of the Troll Empire. Until now, he has not been able to receive the marriage proposal envoys we sent." Colin laughed coldly, clearly not believing the Duke's excuse. At this moment, he suddenly realized that Pine Forest Town's Baron Lamba might be a good opportunity to test the Duke. Thinking of this, a cold glint flashed through Colin's eyes. He immediately said to Eamon, "I will personally write a letter for Baron Lamba." After saying this, he sat down in front of the desk, picked up a quill, and quickly finished writing a letter. Eamon, who understood Colin's temperament very well, had already guessed that the wording of this letter might not be to Baron Lamba's liking. On this side, Colin had already sealed the letter and handed it to Eamon. "Send it to Pine Forest Town." "Yes, master." 5 days later, that Baron Lamba really did personally come to Ice Stone City. At the same time, he also brought over 1,000 soldiers. His murderous appearance made Knight Roger, who was on the city wall, laugh. "Who are you trying to scare with such a small number of people?" Knight Roger shook his head and laughed at the squire beside him as he ordered people to open the city gates and welcome Baron Lamba in. Baron Lamba was a middle-aged man with a sturdy figure and a rough face. The beard on his face was connected to his hair, making him look like an irritable gorilla. "Where is Viscount Angley?" Baron Lamba's voice was very loud, causing the snow on the city gates to rustle down as soon as he opened his mouth. Knight Roger gave a perfunctory salute and replied with a smile, "Lord Baron, our Viscount is waiting for you at the Red Keep." Baron Lamba's expression became even more gloomy. He was clearly dissatisfied that Colin didn't greet him at the city gates. However, Colin's title was higher than his, so Baron Lamba couldn't really say that Colin was being rude. Of course, Baron Lamba wasn't afraid of Colin. After all, he wasn't Colin's vassal. Although there was a difference in their titles, they didn't have a subordinate relationship. He followed Knight Roger all the way to the Red Keep and saw that Colin was already waiting in front of the castle. Only then did Baron Lamba's expression soften slightly, but his attitude was still as cold as ever. Colin didn't seem to mind the other person's coldness and continued to smile as he greeted Baron Lamba. He even pretended to be affectionate as he pulled on the other person's arm and walked with him to the castle. Baron Lamba couldn't help but feel disdain in his heart. He originally didn't think highly of Colin, this rapidly rising viscounts. He thought that the other person had only followed Marquis Garcia to the Sky Icefield for a stroll and gained some merit to be promoted to viscounts. Now that the two sides had a conflict over population, Baron Lamba disliked Colin even more. This time, he came to Ice Stone City because he was determined to bring back all the citizens that originally belonged to Pine Town. Otherwise, there would probably be no one to help him with the upcoming spring plowing. Just as Baron Lamba was pondering how to open his mouth, he suddenly noticed that someone was quickly approaching from behind. He turned his head in confusion and saw an armored knight wearing a horseface mask dashing towards him, the long sword in his hand glinting with a chilling light. "Assassin!" Baron Lamba immediately yelled. He was about to draw his sword to meet the enemy when he suddenly realized that his right arm was tightly gripped by Colin and couldn't move at all. Baron Lamba was so scared that his soul almost left his body. He immediately realized that this was a trap. Angus. Before he even finished speaking, the strange man wearing the horseface mask had already rushed in front of Baron Lamba. The blade flashed and Baron Lamba's head was instantly chopped off. However, his body was still standing there, blood spurting out from his neck like a fountain. The Lamba family's guards were stunned by this sudden turn of events. They never would have thought that their lord would encounter an assassination at the entrance of the Red Keep. Until Colin's sharp voice rang out, "Catch him, don't let the assassin escape." Only then did the Lamba family's guards wake up from their daze and chase after the assassin who had already run far away. Knight Roger stared blankly at this scene and seemed to understand something. He carefully asked, "Sir, should we chase after him?" Only now did Colin let go of Baron Lamba's right arm and carefully avoided the blood spurting out from the other party's neck. He righteously ordered, "Of course we should chase. Baron Lamba died in Ice Stone City. We are duty-bound and must capture the assassin." Chapter 184. Under the raging cold wind, there were very few people on the streets of Pine Town. The high price of food caused the residents of this small town on the northern frontier to continuously leave. This also caused the town, which wasn't very prosperous to begin with, to become even more desolate. It was said that the irascible lord had already brought more than 1,000 soldiers to Ice Stone City, vowing to capture the fleeing citizens. However, before the citizens were captured, an earth-shattering piece of news came: the lord of Pine Town, Baron Lamba, had actually died in Ice Stone City. No one knew where this news came from, but it quickly spread throughout the town. In just one day, almost everyone in Pine Town knew of this news. But what was strange was that no one from the Lamba family came out to confirm the authenticity of this news. Of course, they didn't deny it either. For a moment, the streets, inns, and taverns of Pine Town were all discussing this shocking news. More and more information was gradually revealed. It was said that the person who assassinated Baron Lamba was an Eastern Knight. And this Eastern Knight's original target was actually Viscount Angley, the lord of the northern frontier who had personally destroyed the Sky Horse Legion. However, at that time, Baron Lamba and Viscount Angley were traveling together, and the assassin actually killed the wrong person in a panic. Poor Baron Lamba, just like that, became Viscount Angley's scapegoat. However, with the help of Viscount Angley, the assassin was still captured and sentenced to death by hanging. His corpse was hung in the plaza of Ice Stone City for a day and a night. These details, which were so vivid, increased the authenticity of this news. Most of the residents of Pine Town already believed that their lord had really met with misfortune in Ice Stone City. The night gradually deepened, but the Lamba family's castle was still brightly lit. A group of family members were gathered in the hall, fiercely debating. Baron Lamba's eldest son, White Lamba, was currently looking at his family members who were arguing with a gloomy expression, his heart filled with anxiety and annoyance. His father's death had caught White somewhat unprepared, and he also smelled a thick scent of conspiracy. How could the assassin from the eastern region be so coincidental? How could the assassin from the eastern region suddenly attack when his father went to visit Viscount Angley and kill the wrong person by coincidence? However, the family knight who came back to Pine Town to report confirmed the identity of the assassin. The assassin was indeed a knight from the eastern region, and a rather famous 4th-grade knight. This assassin had once participated in the Battle of Silvermoon City. After the battle, his whereabouts were unknown. He indeed had a blood feud with Viscount Angley, so his motive for assassinating him was very sufficient. However, White still felt that Viscount Angley had something to do with his father's death. After all, the reason father went to Ice Stone City was to cause trouble for the other party. Just as White's imagination was running wild, he suddenly heard someone calling his name. He raised his head and saw the butler looking at him with concern. "Young master, are you all right?" "I'm fine." "Young master, you have to make a decision quickly." "What decision?" Everyone looked at the bewildered White and was momentarily speechless. They had been arguing here for so long, but the young master didn't listen at all. In the end, it was the butler who asked for instructions. "Young Master White, recently, because of the old master's death, the people of Pine Town are in a state of panic. In addition, the elites of the family army are still in Ice Stone City, so we've already discovered that many people with evil intentions are secretly inciting the civilians who lack food and preparing to rob the town's granaries. Therefore, what we should do next, please make a decision." White's brows instantly furrowed even tighter. He didn't expect that at such a time, there would actually be signs of a rebellion in Pine Town. The slave rebellion from before had already exhausted the Lamba family. If another civilian rebellion occurred, and at such a sensitive time, White was very doubtful that his family would be able to survive. "Notify the entire town, starting tonight, there will be a curfew." White had just opened his mouth when he suddenly discovered that the outside of the castle was suddenly boiling. Soaring flames lit up the pitch-black night sky, and waves of battle cries broke the silence of the night. When the people of the Lamba family saw this situation, they instantly panicked and hurriedly looked at White for help. At this time, White was also extremely panicked, but he still forced himself to calm down and ordered the family knights to immediately gather the army and suppress the rebellion. At this time, Pine Town had indeed become a pot of porridge. All kinds of rumors started out of nowhere, but they quickly spread like a plague. Some said that the Lamba family was preparing to flee with the last of the town's food reserves. Some also said that the trolls were about to invade again, and that there was no hope for this year's spring plowing. Some even said that when Baron Lamba went to Ice Stone City, he took all the elites of the family army with him, so at this time, Pine Town's military strength was empty. Panic, impatience, and greed continued to spread, causing all the townspeople who were suffering from food shortage to become restless. No one knew who shouted first and lit the first fire, but soon, this fire engulfed the entire Pine Town like a prairie fire. Thus, the rebellion began. When the faint light of dawn dispersed the thick fog in the wilderness, an army was slowly advancing towards Pine Town. "Sir Viscounts, Pine Town is not far ahead. You really don't need to continue escorting us, we can definitely escort the Lord Baron's body back," Knight Mark respectfully advised Colin. This knight of the Lamba family was especially vigilant towards the young Lord of Ice Stone City. He also felt that the Lord Baron's death was very strange. "Sigh, Baron Lamba died in Ice Stone City, and I have an unavoidable responsibility. Let me send his body back to Pine Town. Moreover, there have been many rebellions on the northern frontier recently, so I am worried that you will encounter some mishap on your way back." Knight Mark silently cursed in his heart, the greatest mishap has already happened in your Ice Stone City. However, when faced with the powerful Viscount Angley, he still couldn't change anything. He could only suppress his worries in the bottom of his heart and silently advance towards Pine Town. After walking for a while, a scout suddenly returned and reported, "Sir Viscounts, Pine Town ahead is ablaze. It seems that a rebellion has occurred." "What?" Knight Mark was still in shock, but Colin had already decisively issued an order. "Pass down my orders, speed up and enter the town to quell the rebellion." "Sir Viscounts, it should only be a small-scale slave rebellion. Our Lamba family can definitely deal with it ourselves, there is no need to trouble you." Knight Mark still didn't want the Angeli family's army to enter Pine Town, but Colin completely ignored him and still gave the order. Knight Mark, there is no need to be so formal. We are all vassals of the Duke of St. Hilda, so it is only right that we help each other. Black Cavalry, attack. With this order, the Black Cavalry, who had been waiting for a long time, immediately rushed towards Pine Town like a surging tide. Knight Mark stared blankly at the cavalry army in the distance, the uneasiness in his heart reaching its peak. Chapter 185. In Pine Town, the rebellion had yet to be completely quelled. However, under the suppression of the Lamba family's army, the rebel army's arrogance had been completely suppressed. Based on this trend, it wouldn't be long before the rebellion was completely quelled. Some of the rebels also saw that the situation wasn't good. Seeing that they couldn't defeat the Lamba family's army, they rushed towards the town gates, preparing to take the wealth and food they had plundered from the night before and escape Pine Town. Seeing this, the Lamba family's army didn't stop them. They didn't have enough manpower right now, so their main task was to stabilize the situation within the town. It would be hard to take care of the rebels who escaped, and their escape would reduce the pressure on them. However, just as the rebel army successfully opened the east gate of the town and was about to rush out, they suddenly heard the low sound of a horn from afar. Then, the thunderous sound of horse hooves shook the earth of Pine Town. The black mass of cavalry instantly filled the wilderness outside the town. The rebel army had never seen such an imposing cavalry charge. They were so scared that they immediately scrambled back into the town. It was as if the Lamba family's army was a group of harmless sheep compared to the fierce cavalry. The Black Cavalry has come under the orders of Viscount Angley to assist in quelling the rebellion. Knight Roger, who had rushed to the outskirts of Pine Town, roared. He didn't care whether the Lamba family was willing to accept their help or not. He directly led the black mass of cavalry into the town like a sharp arrow. The situation that followed was naturally easy to describe. The rebel army that even the Lamba family's army couldn't fight against could only kneel and surrender when faced with the even more terrifying Black Cavalry. However, the arrival of the Black Guards caused the people of the Lamba family to be deeply worried. They didn't believe that the Black Cavalry would be so kind as to come and help them quell the rebellion. Moreover, the timing of the Black Cavalry's arrival was too coincidental. Just like how Baron Lamba was assassinated in Ice Stone City, it was full of coincidences. However, when there were too many coincidences, it was hard to believe that this wasn't a scheme planned by someone with ulterior motives. When Colin entered Pine Town, the rebellion in the town had already been quelled. The members of the Lamba family nervously welcomed the powerful young Viscounts into their own castle. Lord Viscounts, thank you for extending a helping hand this time. The Lamba family will forever be grateful. White carefully followed behind Colin and respectfully thanked him. The ferocious Black Cavalry made him feel a strong threat, so even though he was full of doubts about this Viscount Angley, White didn't dare to show it. Knight White, there's no need to be so polite. As for your father's death, I was also responsible for not being able to protect him well. Therefore, helping to quell the rebellion this time can be considered my apology to the Lamba family. Colin spoke politely, but after entering the castle hall, he sat on the main seat. The corner of White's mouth twitched, but he didn't dare to say anything. The steward of the Lamba family carefully probed, Lord Viscounts, how many days are you planning to stay in Pine Town? We'll arrange a reception for you. There's no need to specially arrange anything. Colin smiled and waved his hand, I'll leave today. White's eyes brightened. He suddenly felt that he might have misunderstood this Viscount Angley. But in the next second, he immediately dispelled this childish thought, because Colin continued. However, Knight Roger will stay behind, and a portion of the Black Cavalry will also stay behind to prevent another rebellion in Pine Town. Lord Viscounts, we appreciate your kindness, but protecting Pine Town is the responsibility of the Lamba family, and we have the ability to shoulder it alone. There's no need for you to, Knight White, Colin directly interrupted White's excuse, you're not the Lord of Pine Town yet, right? Indeed, I'm not, Although White was the eldest son of Baron Lamba and the first heir to the title of Baron, strictly speaking, he couldn't be considered the Lord of Pine Town until he was personally conferred the title by the Duke of St. Hilda. Colin spread out his hands and said, "So, your priority now is to go to Winter Castle to accept the conferment of the Dukes of the North, and not to boast to me about your ability to protect Pine Town. I'm not doubting your ability, but your qualifications." Wright opened his mouth and was about to defend himself, but Colin didn't give him the chance to do so. He said in an aggressive tone, "You're right. Furthermore, Knight White, if I didn't lead the army to help the Lamba family quell the rebellion, you might not even be able to protect Pine Town. According to the feudal rules, if you lose Pine Town, what qualifications do you have to inherit your father's title?" This time, White couldn't hold it in any more and loudly defended himself, "Lord Viscounts. You can't doubt the ability of the Lamba family. Even without the help of the Black Cavalry, we can still defend Pine Town. As for whether I have the qualifications to inherit the title of Baron, that's up to the Dukes of the North to decide." Colin chuckled and waved his hand, indicating that White didn't need to be agitated. He said calmly, "That's why I said that your priority now is to go to Winter Castle to meet the Duke. Don't worry, I have no intention of competing with the Lamba family for the ownership of Pine Town. Since you have no intention of occupying Pine Town, please take your army with you." "Knight White, you're too petty. The reason I left my army behind is to help you defend Pine Town. Don't be in a hurry to reject me. Don't you need the family's army to escort you to Winter Castle? You should know that the northern frontier isn't peaceful now. If you take away the family's army, aren't you worried that Pine Town's rebellion will rise again?" White was speechless and seemed to feel that Colin's words made sense. Seeing this, the old butler of the Lamba family hurriedly stood up and said, "Lord Viscounts, thank you for your kindness. However, the Lamba family doesn't want to owe too many favors, so it's best that we sign an agreement to determine the conditions and rewards for your assistance in defending Pine Town." White finally reacted and nodded repeatedly, "Yes, yes. Lord Viscounts, let's sign an agreement." Colin laughed inwardly, seeing through the Lamba family's plan. They wanted to write down the conditions for the garrison's assistance on paper. This way, Colin wouldn't be able to blatantly plot against Pine Town. However, what the Lamba family didn't know was that Colin didn't intend to occupy this town. "All right. However, as a reward for dispatching troops to quell the rebellion and assisting in maintaining stability, I need 10 years of logging rights in the northern forest region of Pine Town." 10 years? White exclaimed and shook his head repeatedly, "That's too long. Lord Viscounts, I can only give you 3 years of logging rights at most." The northern forest region of Pine Town could be said to be the Lamba family's cash cow. The red pine trees produced there were not only excellent construction materials, but they also produced a type of pine resin that was an extremely expensive medicinal material. "Knight White, before you accept the Duke's conferment and become the Lord of Pine Town, you have no right to bargain with me. The Angeli family will protect Pine Town for you for the time being." White suppressed the humiliation and anger in his heart and could only lower his head. "All right, then I'll have to trouble you, Lord Viscounts. I'll set off for Winter Castle to pay my respects to the Duke." Only then did Colin reveal a satisfied smile. His gaze passed through the Lamba family and looked in the direction of Winter Castle. "Duke of St. Hilda, it's time for you to come out and meet your guests." Chapter 186. The Oman family's castle was located in the northwest of Fallen Eagle City, occupying a large area of land. Unlike the other nobles' castles, this castle did not have an exquisite garden or unique architecture. Instead, the empty space around the castle was filled with crops and fruit trees. The castle was built with sturdy but slightly rustic limestone. It had a simple design and did not have any extra decorations, making full use of the space. Amongst the nobles who pursued elegance and luxury, the Oman family who advocated frugality and practicality were an exception. It was said that this style was brought into the Oman family by the commoner grade 6 warrior who married the countess, but it had been passed down to this day. This generation's Count Oman agreed with this tradition and was not ashamed of it. Instead, he proudly proclaimed, "When you have a higher spiritual pursuit, material pleasures are not worth mentioning." However, this Count Alman did not seem to have much attainment in the arts, so he did not know what the spiritual pursuit he was talking about was. In the evening, a group slowly entered the castle. The Oman family's guards did not stop them, but they did not welcome them either. They knew that this was the Count's illegitimate son, Knight Vala, who had returned. Knight Vala seemed to be used to the guards' cold attitude. After entering the castle, she helped Caitlin off the carriage. After sending Caitlin back to her room, Vala walked towards the dining hall. She knew that her father was most likely having his meal at this time. It was a tradition of the Oman family to finish their dinner before the sun set. That way, they could save a candle. As expected, Vala saw Count Oman in the dining hall, as well as his lover, Lady Penny. The two were sitting at a long table and enjoying their dinner. In the past, whenever Vala saw such a scene, she would feel a faint warmth in her heart, thinking that her father really doted on her mother to allow a commoner girl to sit at the same table as him. But now, Vala could only feel a bone-deep anger. The story of the cuckoo taking over the sparrow's nest that Colin told her surfaced in Vala's mind again, almost causing her to lose her composure. "Father, mother." Vala forcefully suppressed the anger in her heart and greeted them with a normal expression. Count Oman had already finished his meal, and the servants on the side immediately came forward to clear the table. "Did the trip to Ice Stone City go smoothly?" Count Oman wiped his mouth with a napkin and asked. "Everything is going well. Viscount Angley welcomed us warmly." "Amen, what's the current situation in Ice Stone City?" "We have enough food and soldiers." Count Alman pondered over Vala's brief comment and frowned slightly. "Then, have you figured out Viscount Angley's inclination?" "Yes. I'm sure that if a rebellion breaks out at the northern frontier, Viscount Angley will definitely stand by our side." "Oh. Why are you so sure?" Count Oman raised an eyebrow. Viscount Angley was already holding a grudge against the Duke of St. Hilda for marrying Miss Vera to Prince Tup. In Silvermoon City, he discovered that the Duke had actually sent someone to assassinate Vera, using Vera's death as an excuse for the northern frontier to intervene in the half-elf kingdom. This also caused Viscount Angley, who loved Miss Vera, to be completely disappointed in the Duke of St. Hilda, and even resented him. When he heard Vala say that Colin thought that the Duke had tried to assassinate Vera, Count Oman's eyes flashed slightly, but his expression quickly returned to normal. "So, Vera chose to stay in Silvermoon City instead of returning to the northern frontier because she resented the Duke of St. Hilda?" "Yes." Count Oman nodded, as if he agreed with Vala's judgment. Then, he suddenly remembered something and asked, "By the way, you haven't eaten yet, right?" "No, I haven't. Caitlin is still waiting for me in the room. I will eat with her later." "All right, then go quickly. Remember to finish your meal before the sky turns dark." "Yes." Vala bowed again to Count Oman and Penny before taking her leave. Until Vala's figure disappeared from the hall, his biological mother, Penny, did not take the initiative to speak to him. "Do you think Viscount Angley has a chance of winning him over?" Penny put down the knife and fork in her hand and finally spoke. Count Oman shook his head slowly. "Ever since the failed assassination attempt a year ago, the Angeli family has not been on the same side as us. Do you think he knows that we were the ones who sent the assassins?" "He should have guessed it." Count Oman's eyes were deep. From the series of events in Silvermoon City, this Colin Angeli is a very smart person. It is impossible for him not to guess that we were the ones who did it. Penny snorted softly and complained. "You should not have caused trouble and coveted the Angeli family's title. You have already treated Vala very well. First, you let him be baptized as a knight, then you helped him marry a noble lady. There is no need to think of ways to compensate him." Guilt flashed in Count Amon's eyes, but he did not explain anything. Instead, he asked, since the Angeli family is difficult to win over, how does your brother plan to deal with them? Penny hesitated, but shook her head. I don't know. My brother did not tell me. Count Amon's expression was calm, but an indescribable anger surged in his heart. He knew that he was no longer trusted. During the chaos at the northern frontier a year ago, his indecisiveness had caused the Saint Thean family to be on guard. This time, they were clearly on guard against him. Seeing her silent husband, Pan Ni smiled and said gently, "You don't have to be impatient. Spring is coming. My brother's plan at the northern frontier is complete. This time, the house of Saint Hilda will not be able to escape destruction." Where is your brother now? He is in Imperial Dragon City. Count Amon frowned, but did not ask what Penny's brother was doing in the capital of the Radiant Empire. Because he knew that even if he asked, Penny would not tell him the truth. There was no need for him to ask for a rebuff. Actually, regarding this rebellion, Earl Amon had no confidence at all. Many of the Saint Thean family's plans were hidden from him. This feeling of not being able to see the big picture made Count Amon very anxious. Moreover, he knew his lord, the Duke of St. Hilda, who had controlled the northern frontier for more than 30 years. He knew that the other party was not someone who could be easily dealt with. Moreover, this duke had hidden his strength. A paladin was enough to suppress a region. Although the St. Thean family had invited the paladins of the giant demon empire to heavily injure the Duke of St. Hilda, no one knew how serious the injuries of the Dukes of the North were. Penny seemed to see the man's worry. She smiled and said, "The repairs to the city walls of Falling Eagle City have been completed. I was thinking that since we still have some construction materials left, should we repair and strengthen some of the old buildings in the city?" You can arrange that yourself," Count Amon replied casually, then stood up. "I'm going to the study." "Okay." Penny smiled and stood up. At the same time, she raised her head, as if waiting for the man's kiss. But Count Amon did not seem to notice his lover's hint and walked out. Chapter 187. As one of the oldest cities on this continent, Imperial Dragon City was established much earlier than the Empire of Light. Its history could be traced back to 7,000 years ago. At that time, the dragons had not gone extinct, and the High Elves had not disappeared. These two powerful races were also the rulers of the world at that time. However, a mountain could not accommodate two tigers. The war between the dragons and the elves was also the main theme of that era. At the beginning of the war, the dragons relied on their stronger individual strength to suppress the elves. However, as the war continued, the dragons' population decreased, and their weakness of reproduction was gradually exposed. The elves began to gain the upper hand and gradually drove the dragons out of the center of the continent. Then, the Empire of Light was established, and Imperial Dragon City was the capital of the Empire of Light. The name of the city was deliberately chosen by the elves to humiliate the dragons. The so-called Imperial meant to control and dominate. It was due to this reason that Imperial Dragon City had become a thorn in the side of the dragons ever since it was built. Throughout history, countless angry dragons had attempted to burn it to the ground with their dragon flames, but none of them succeeded. The dragons and the High Elves had disappeared from the world. Imperial Dragon City, the most dazzling stage in the center of the continent, now had a new protagonist. Now, there were not many buildings left by the elves in Imperial Dragon City. The river of time could wash away all traces. Humans had been the owners of Imperial Dragon City for more than 1,000 years, and had deeply engraved their mark in the bones of the city. But the palace was an exception. This palace, called Phoenix Palace, was the only building left by the elves. The ruler of the High Elves was called Phoenix King, and this palace was his former palace. Because of the efforts of the best architects of the elves, this beautiful palace had been preserved until today. Even the San Lorenzo royal family was conquered by its beauty, the glory it represented, and the glory it symbolized. They were willing to use it as the palace of the Empire of Light. Phoenix Palace was located in the center of Imperial Dragon City. It was a group of hundreds of palaces. The high dome of the main palace was white and flawless. It was a dome inlaid with pieces of white jade. Even in the moonless night, it emitted a cold light. The walls of the palace were inlaid with light blue frosted marble tiles, which looked grotesque under the sunlight. Hundreds of marble columns carved with rose patterns supported the high roof, and the inner walls of the roof were painted with all kinds of murals. Small and round sculptures of young girls were neatly arranged on the wide window. Each of them had different shapes and looked charmingly naive. The king's chi that had been accumulated over thousands of years made the entire main hall exude a thick and heavy pressure, causing those who stepped into it to involuntarily want to prostrate themselves in worship. However, in such a solemn palace, waves of decadent sounds could be heard. An attendant walked to the front of the hall and immediately stopped awkwardly. With a wry smile, he stood in the cold wind and waited quietly. However, the sounds of moaning continued to enter the servant's ears, causing him to feel hot all over. But when the bone-piercing cold wind blew, he immediately sobered up and hurriedly covered his ears with both hands until he could no longer hear the movements in the hall. After a long time, the door of the hall finally opened, and a beautiful lady with a graceful figure walked out. The servant hurriedly put down his hands and bowed. The noblewoman saw the waiter shivering in the cold wind and smiled charmingly at him. "Ah, are you eavesdropping?" After saying that, she did not wait for the servant to answer and left with a smile. The servant lowered his head from beginning to end, not daring to look at the lady at all. But that familiar voice still allowed him to distinguish the identity of the other party. It was Marquise Grandi. However, the servant was not too surprised. After all, His Majesty's hobby of cuckolding his vassals was no secret in the circle of the Empire's nobles. The nobles of Imperial Dragon City had long been accustomed to this. It had even evolved to the point that if there was no cuckolding on their heads, they would be embarrassed to call themselves a true noble of the Empire. The servant slowly walked into the hall and bowed meticulously, not daring to show any emotions on his face. The current emperor of the Empire of Light was named Reinhardt San Lorenzo, and he was also respectfully called Emperor Reinhardt. Emperor Reinhardt was a burly middle-aged man with blonde hair and blue eyes. He had a thick beard and straight eyebrows. Coupled with the unique aquiline nose of the San Lorenzo family, he looked very imposing at first glance. It was just that he was dressed too casually at this time. He was only wearing a thin shirt with his chest open, revealing his thick golden chest hair. The servants brought in the cold wind from outside the hall, but Emperor Reinhardt didn't feel cold at all. "Your Majesty, the emissary of the Gnome Kingdom will arrive in Imperial Dragon City tomorrow morning. Do you want to meet him personally?" Emperor Reinhardt picked up the goblet on the table and poured all the red wine in it into his mouth. He seemed to still feel thirsty, so he poured himself another goblet and drank it in one gulp. Burp! After burping without caring about his image, Emperor Reinhardt glanced at the servant and asked in an emotionless tone, "Didn't we agree to let the Queen meet him?" The servant replied carefully, "Your Majesty, it was Her Highness who asked me to ask you. She hopes that you..." Emperor Reinhardt waved his hand impatiently. "It's just an emissary of the Gnome King. The Queen can meet him. What else is there? The Prime Minister hopes that you can attend the Imperial Conference tomorrow. He said that the spring plowing is imminent and needs you." Emperor Reinhardt became even more impatient. "The Prime Minister can host the Imperial Conference himself. I have other things to do." The attendant nodded and then carefully said, "Your Majesty, it will be Prince Leihi's birthday in 3 days. Her Highness the Empress wants me to ask you, will the prince's birthday banquet be held in the banquet hall of Phoenix Palace like in previous years?" Hearing this, Emperor Reinhardt fell silent. The servant who did not get a response for a long time secretly raised his head, only to see the emperor's cold gaze. The servant trembled in fear and hurriedly lowered his head again. He was annoyed that he dared to raise his head just now. The atmosphere in the hall seemed to freeze in an instant. After a long time, the servant's cold sweat had almost soaked his clothes. Finally, he heard Emperor Reinhardt's calm voice. Yes, the same as in previous years. Yes, Your Majesty. The servant was relieved. He hurriedly bowed and left, not daring to delay for a moment longer. The heavy door of the hall opened and closed, isolating the snowy world outside. Emperor Reinhardt picked up his wine cup again and began to drink by himself. The hall was filled with a decadent aura, as well as a faint trace of resentment. Suddenly, Emperor Reinhardt's gaze froze. He turned his head abruptly. The golden curtain moved without any wind, and a man covered in a black mage robe appeared there. However, there was a sharp sword pressed against his neck. However, the man did not seem to care about such a threat. He continued to smile at Emperor Reinhardt. Your Majesty, when did Prince Rhy have the right to hold a birthday banquet in the Phoenix Palace? Chapter 188. I'm sorry, Your Majesty. He accidentally slipped into the palace and disturbed you. The knight with the sword bowed slightly to Emperor Reinhardt and apologized. Emperor Reinhardt looked at the intruder who was restrained by his knight and smiled. He waved his hand and said, "It's okay. You can leave now." The knight was still a little hesitant, but the intruder in the mage robe said, "Your Majesty is a 6th grade knight. Is he afraid of a mage at such a close distance?" This was true. A mage was definitely at a disadvantage in a one-on-one duel with a knight, especially when the two sides were close enough. If this mage who broke into the Phoenix Palace wanted to harm Emperor Reinhardt, his head would be twisted off by the 6th grade knight as soon as the first syllable of the spell came out of his mouth. Humph. The knight glared at the intruder fiercely and then withdrew his sword. He bowed to Emperor Reinhardt and then quietly left. I heard that they all call you Mr. Feng. Emperor Reinhardt poured himself another glass of red wine and looked at the mage opposite him with a smile. It's just a title. Your Majesty, you can call me whatever you want. Mr. Feng put down his hood, revealing a slightly pale and weather-beaten face. He walked to Emperor Reinhardt and bowed respectfully. Emperor Reinhardt looked at the impeccable palace etiquette and said with a smile, "It's been more than 300 years. It's hard for you to still remember how to bow." Of course I remember. Mr. Feng said seriously, "If I don't dare to mention my family name and forget the etiquette, what's the difference between our family and those muddle-headed civilians?" "Ha, you're quite resentful," Emperor Reinhardt said playfully. "I wouldn't dare. Your Majesty, we, Saint Thean, will always abide by our duties. We're not like some people who get carried away and take Your Majesty's favor as the right to overstep their boundaries." Duty? Emperor Reinhardt seemed to have heard the biggest joke in the world. When the judge of your family pierced the back of the Black Emperor with his sword, was he also abiding by his duties? Your Majesty, no matter how pure the bloodline of the white sheep is, it's inevitable that there will be a black mutant among them. You cannot disregard the loyalty of the House of Saint Thean just because of the Inquisitor's betrayal. Just like how we can't deny the San Lorenzo family's status as a model knight just because of Prince Lacey's arrogance. Reinhardt could not help but laugh when he saw that Mr. Fu kept bringing the topic to Prince Lacey. Prince Lacey is my uncle, and he's also a powerful paladin. Do you think he's not qualified to be a role model for knights? Your Majesty, if you want to be a role model for knights, you need not only strength, but also the most important virtue. There is no doubt about Prince Lacey's strength, but as a collateral descendant of the San Lorenzo family, he has become arrogant because of the favor. He has repeatedly occupied the banquet hall of Phoenix Palace to hold birthday celebrations. This kind of behavior is a serious violation of a knight's virtue. Mr. Qi, you took such a huge risk to come to Phoenix Palace to see me, just to sow discord between me and Prince Rhy. If that's really the case, then your House of St. Theon should continue to be silent for another 300 years. Faced with Emperor Reinhardt's ridicule, Mr. Fu was still calm, as if nothing in the world could move him. He shook his head and said, "No, Your Majesty. No, Your Majesty, I'm actually here for the northern region." The northern frontier. Humph. I heard that you've made a big scene in the northern frontier. You even joined forces with the trolls. What, do you really think I can't kill you, a traitor to the human race? Your Majesty, please don't get angry. Think about it carefully. I've been in the Troll Empire for so many years. Have the trolls' strength grown or weakened? Emperor Reinhardt swirled the red wine glass in his hand and sneered disdainfully. What? You want to take the credit for Marquis Garcia? No, Your Majesty, that's not what I meant. The House of St. Hilda is certainly worthy of being the barrier to the north of the empire. I don't dare to take the credit. I just want to tell you that the trolls are just a knife in my hand. I have no feelings for them, let alone loyalty. Then who are you going to cut with the knife in your hand now? The House of St. Hilda. Mr. Fu said without hesitation. Emperor Reinhardt didn't show any surprise. Obviously, he already knew. Then, why did you come to me? I want to ask you not to intervene in the upcoming war on the northern frontier. Ha ha ha. Emperor Reinhardt suddenly laughed. Have you forgotten that the Duke St. Hilda is the Empress' brother? Why do you think I'll sit by and watch a traitor's descendant like you steal the power of the northern frontier? Mr. Fu seemed to have a card up his sleeve in the face of Emperor Reinhardt's questioning. He slowly took out a scroll from his loose mage robe and respectfully handed it to the Emperor. Emperor Reinhardt showed a trace of doubt, but he still took it personally. When he opened it, he saw that the scroll was filled with dense elvish characters. Emperor Reinhardt, who had received a strict palace education, naturally understood the elvish characters. But the more he read, the more he frowned. Mr. Fu stood with his hands behind his back and waited quietly. Only the sound of steady breathing could be heard in the hall. There wasn't much content in the scroll, but Emperor Reinhardt read it for half an hour. When he raised his head again, the frivolous expression on his face had disappeared, and his tone had become extremely solemn. How can you make me believe that it will succeed? Mr. Fu bowed again and said indifferently, I'll show it to you at the northern frontier. I only ask that you give me this opportunity. Also, I still believe that Prince Rhy isn't qualified to hold a birthday party in Phoenix Palace. This time, Emperor Reinhardt didn't speak. After pondering for a while, he finally nodded. Okay, I'll give you a chance. Thank you, Your Majesty. A smile finally appeared on Mr. Fu's skinny face. How many people have read this scroll? Including you, 3 people. Emperor Reinhardt narrowed his eyes, and his sharp eyes were full of undisguised fear. Who else besides you and me? Mr. Fu didn't say anything. The atmosphere in the hall became more and more solemn, and visible heat waves rose in the air. Emperor Reinhardt's eyes had turned golden, and countless tiny golden lines crawled all over his face, as if he was wearing a golden mask. An invisible pressure filled the hall, making it hard for people to breathe. Mr. Su was like a small boat in the middle of a stormy sea, as if he could be torn to pieces by this violent storm at any time. But his expression was still indifferent, and he ignored Emperor Reinhardt's threat. After an unknown amount of time, the storm suddenly calmed down. The golden light quietly faded away, and Emperor Reinhardt returned to his original lazy and frivolous posture, as if everything that happened just now was just an illusion. Okay, Mr. Fu, I'll give you a chance. I hope that you can prove to me that you are qualified to be the new lord of the northern frontier. Mr. Fu let out a long breath. Obviously, he wasn't as relaxed as he appeared to be. Thank you, Your Majesty. Chapter 189. Viscounts Austin, why are you only here now? I thought that the Eastern Territory didn't want to redeem Marquis Vincent. Colin lazily leaned against the recliner and narrowed his eyes at the Viscount's Austen in front of him. Whitey was curled up on his leg like a blue sea cucumber, sleeping soundly. "My apologies, Lord Viscounts, I had some matters to attend to, so I was delayed." The Viscount's Austen's expression was a bit awkward, but he didn't have the nerve to say the reason he was delayed until now. The reason he had only arrived at Ice Stone City now was because he had underestimated the chaotic situation at the northern frontier and overestimated the combat strength of his own guards. Before the winter festival, the Viscount's Austen had already set out for Ice Stone City under the orders of the Duke of the Eastern Territory, but after entering the northern frontier, he realized that he had brought too few guards with him. After bracing himself and advancing for a few days, the 100 or so guards that the Viscount's Austen had brought with him suffered heavy losses. Those starving slave mobs attacked his troops without any regard for their lives. Adding on the fact that he was unfamiliar with the place, the Viscount's Austen hadn't even seen the shadow of Ice Stone City before he realized that his guards were on the verge of collapse under the endless attacks of the rebel army. Helpless, he could only lead his troops back. When he returned, he was naturally scolded by the Duke of the Eastern Territory and even had one of his ribs broken. After resting at home for a while, the Viscount's Austen brought enough guards and set out on his second trip to Ice Stone City. This time, he finally arrived without a hitch. Of course, there were many dangers along the way, but the Viscount's Austen definitely wouldn't tell Colin. After all, it would really damage the reputation of the nobles of the Eastern Territory. "Then, what does the Duke of St. Prospero think of my suggestion?" "The Duke agrees with your suggestion and is willing to exchange Marquis Garcia for Marquis Vincent." "When and where?" "If you don't have any objections, we will exchange the prisoners of war in a month at the Raging River." The Viscount's Austen took out a simple map with markings and handed it to Colin. "I have no problem with the location." Colin looked at the mark on the map and said, "But as for the time, change it to 3 months later." "All right, the northern frontier isn't very peaceful right now. Let's do it in 3 months. I'll go back and report to the Duke. If he doesn't have any objections, then it's settled." "Yes." From the beginning to the end, the two of them didn't mention any prisoners other than the 2 marquises because they knew that there were no other prisoners. In the Battle of Shadow Canyon, other than the 8,000 remnants of the army that managed to escape under the leadership of Knight Roger and the captured Marquis Garcia, the rest of the Black Cavalry soldiers had all died in battle. Similarly, after the battle at Silvermoon City, Colin had returned the favor by executing all the prisoners of war in the Sky Horse Army. The first confrontation between the northern frontier and the eastern region after 100 years could be said to be a lose-lose situation. Perhaps, this was the result that the St. Thean family, who was hiding in the shadows and manipulating the situation, wanted to see the most. Not long after the Viscount's Austen left, Steward Aemon came to report, "Master, the reinforcements from the half-elf kingdom are about to arrive." Colin excitedly stood up from his seat and smiled, "Oh. Come with me to welcome them." In order to deal with the impending storm on the northern frontier, Colin had written a letter to Queen Aisha last month, asking her to send the Silvermoon Guard to Ice Stone City to provide support. Queen Aisha naturally wouldn't refuse Colin's request and sent out the order the day she received the letter. When Colin led the Knight of Rigo and the others to the top of the city wall, they saw a thin silver-gray line on the horizon to the east of Ice Stone City. As time passed, this thin line gradually spread out and finally covered the wilderness to the east of Ice Stone City. The bright red thorn flag rustled in the cold wind. That was the insignia of the Miller family and also the new symbol of the half-elf royal family. Colin frowned slightly and thought, Queen Aisha couldn't have come personally, could she? Although if Aisha came, she would definitely be a great help to Colin, he hoped that she could stay in Silvermoon City and take care of her baby. Under Colin's gaze, a small group of cavalry broke out from the Silvermoon Guard's formation and quickly rushed towards Ice Stone City. When they arrived at Ice Stone City, the city gates just happened to open and a group of Black Cavalry soldiers came out to welcome them. The half-elf general in the lead immediately dismounted and knelt on one knee, loudly saying, Honorable Viscount Angley, under the orders of Her Majesty the Queen, the 30,000 warriors of the Silvermoon Guard are gathered here and are at your command. Duke Modwin, welcome to Ice Stone City. When Colin first saw William Modwin, he was a little surprised, but he quickly understood the intentions of Queen Aisha's arrangements. Letting this former half-elf prince become the commander of the Silvermoon Guard was indeed a good idea. The current mid-level generals of the Silvermoon Guard were all members of the Miller family. Under the circumstances where Queen Aisha was pregnant and couldn't come, if another member of the Miller family was sent to be the commander, then he might not wholeheartedly follow Colin's orders. Especially when Colin needed the Silvermoon Guard to make a certain sacrifice. Duke Modwin was different. He was an honest man and was easy to control. Moreover, under the circumstances where the mid-level generals of the Silvermoon Guard were all members of the Miller family, if Duke Modwin didn't want to be a mere figurehead, then he had to obtain Colin's support. In this way, the Silvermoon Guard would be more convenient for Colin to completely control. Duke Modwin followed Colin into the city and walked all the way to the Red Fort. At the same time, he reported the situation of the reinforcements. Sir Viscounts, this time I brought a total of 30,000 Silvermoon Guard, 10,000 archers, 7,000 spearmen, 8,000 sword and shield soldiers, 2,000 shield soldiers, and 3,000 light cavalry soldiers. In addition, there are 38 knights and 15 rangers accompanying the army. Well, very good. Colin nodded in satisfaction. With the support of the Silvermoon Guard, he was now more confident. The 3,000 light cavalry soldiers will be incorporated into the Black Cavalry and be under the command of Knight Roger. Yes, sir. In the face of Colin's first order, Duke Modwin didn't hesitate to agree. Even if this order was obviously to take over the cavalry troops of the Silvermoon Guard. Are Her Majesty the Queen and Miss Vera doing well? Her Majesty is in good health. As for Miss Vera. Duke Modwin suddenly turned his head to look at one of the attendants behind him. Colin also turned his head in confusion, but he saw that the attendant slowly took off her helmet, revealing a beautiful smile. It was Vera. Vera, why did you run? Before Colin could finish his words, Vera threw herself into his arms like a swallow returning to its nest. Feeling the warm and soft touch and the familiar fragrance, Colin smiled and said, "Why didn't you tell me in advance that you were coming to Ice Stone City?" Vera buried her head in Colin's arms and said in a muffled voice, "Don't you welcome me?" "Of course not." Colin laughed and said, "The door of the Red Fort will always be open to you." When Duke Modwin and the others saw this, they all quietly stepped back to a distance, allowing the two lovers who had not seen each other for a long time to say goodbye. Chapter 190. Early in the morning, Colin woke up from his dream. The fireplace was still burning and making a crackling sound. The girl's body temperature and fragrance still lingered on the bed, but she was no longer there. "Good morning, Colin." Colin sat up and saw Vera sitting by the dressing table in front of the window. The most beautiful flower in the house of St. Hilda had already changed into a bright yellow crocheted dress. She was facing the mirror and pasting a rose gold ornament on her forehead. "Good morning, Vera." Colin looked at Vera, who was not far away, with appreciation. In his opinion, the girl seemed to have matured a lot after not seeing her for a long time. Her blue and pure eyes were beautiful, and the makeup on her face was even more gorgeous and charming than usual. The bright red lip gloss made her perfect outline look even more three-dimensional. Although there was still a trace of the shyness of a delicate young girl, there was more of a natural and graceful elegance and solemnity, as well as a gradually blossoming charm. "Do I look good?" After Vera finished dressing up, she turned around and smiled at Colin. The sunlight outside the window was very good, and the rays of light shone in and fell on the girl's body, reflecting a faint halo. "Of course, your beauty is overshadowed by the warm winter sun." Colin smiled and flattered her. Vera rolled her eyes cutely, as if she felt that Colin's praise was too exaggerated. "This is what Queen Aisha taught me." The girl lifted the hem of her dress and twirled in a circle. Colin thought that it was no wonder. He felt that this dress was a little familiar, and it was not Vera's usual style. It seems that you have learned a lot during the time you were in Silvermoon City. Yes. Queen Aisha also told me about her past. After listening to her story, I realized that I am actually very lucky compared to her. After saying that, Vera stretched out her hands to Colin and motioned for him to hug her. Colin stepped forward with a smile and hugged the girl through her thin dress. At this time, he finally understood that the reason why Vera was able to walk out of the shadow of her past was all thanks to Queen Aisha's persuasion. She was such a sweet lover. I've sent someone to Winter Castle to request the Duke of St. Hilda to marry you. It won't be long before you can officially become the mistress of the Red Castle. She didn't know if it was because of the man's words or because of the warm embrace, but the girl's body gradually became soft and her whole body sank into Colin's embrace. Colin, even if my adoptive father does not agree to our marriage, I will never leave you. Vera said firmly. Colin smiled with relief and tightened his grip on the girl's soft and slender waist. He promised, "Don't worry, I will make the Duke agree to our marriage." Their marriage had to be approved by the Duke. Otherwise, Vera would be eloping with him. This was obviously not a result that Colin, who had greater ambitions, was willing to accept. However, judging from the current situation, the Duke of St. Hilda really didn't seem to be willing to marry Vera to Colin. The messenger from Ice Stone City had been waiting in Winter Castle for more than 2 months, but he still hadn't received an audience with the Duke. Therefore, Colin took advantage of Baron Lamba's provocation and sent the Baron's son to Winter Castle to test if the Duke of St. Hilda was seriously injured and couldn't receive guests, or if he was purposely delaying the meeting with the messenger from Ice Stone City. If the Duke really met with the Lamba family but didn't see the messenger from Ice Stone City, then Colin would have to reformulate his next plan. "If you don't want to give it to me, then I'll snatch it from you." Feeling some changes in the man's body, Vera suddenly struggled out of Colin's embrace and changed the topic. "Colin, are you hungry? Let's go eat breakfast." "Okay," Colin smiled mischievously, understanding that the girl probably still hadn't recovered from last night's madness. With Vera's help, Colin quickly got dressed and walked to the dining room together. After a sumptuous breakfast, Vera suggested that they go to Ice Stone City for a stroll, and Colin naturally didn't object. Today was a rare day of good weather. The warm sun hung high in the sky, dispelling some of the winter's cold. Colin and Vera walked hand in hand on the streets of Ice Stone City, but they didn't cause too much of a commotion. This wasn't because the people of Ice Stone City were disrespectful to their lord, but because Colin and Vera deliberately hid their identities. Colin wore a wide triangular hat that covered most of his face, and Vera wore a black veil, returning to her appearance when Colin first met her. The guards followed the two of them from afar, but they didn't make a big fuss. "Colin, the slaves in your territory are a little different from the ones I saw before." "How are they different?" Vera tilted her head and looked at the slaves who were concentrating on their work. She said, "The slaves I saw in Cold Winter City were all lazy. If they didn't have the whip of the overseer, they would rather lie on the ground and bask in the sun for the whole day. However, the slaves in your territory are different. Even if they don't have the whip, they are still very motivated. Do you know the reason for this?" Vera pondered for a moment and shook her head, indicating that she didn't understand. "Because I gave them hope." "Hope?" "Yes." Colin told Vera about the point system that he implemented in Ice Stone City. Vera thought for a moment and nodded. "It is indeed a great idea. However, Colin, aren't you worried that the number of slaves in your hands will decrease? 10 places per month, and only 120 free people will be produced in a year. Even after 100 years, only 10,000 slaves will be qualified to become free people. However, in this process, the wealth that the slaves create will far exceed the value of these 10,000 slaves. Moreover, with the current situation at the northern frontier, do you think that I will be worried about the lack of slaves?" Vera thought carefully and nodded in agreement. Colin, you are a kind and wise lord. Colin laughed and suddenly lamented in his heart. Such a method of exploitation could actually be called benevolent. For a moment, he didn't know whether to be happy or sad. After walking for a few blocks, a group of children attracted Vera's attention. In an open space that was the size of a basketball court, there was an old gentleman who looked to be around 50 years old. In front of him, there were hundreds of children gathered. The older ones were around 13 or 14 years old, and the younger ones were only 4 or 5 years old. The only thing that they had in common was that they were all wearing shabby clothes and iron rings on their feet. This was a group of slave children. The old gentleman was writing on a wall with charcoal, and then he led the slave children to read aloud. Colin, is this also your arrangement? Yes. Vera turned around and looked at Colin with eager eyes. At this time, Colin's image in her heart had become particularly high. However, what she didn't know was that Colin only thought that these slave children were too weak and couldn't do heavy work. Therefore, it was better to let someone teach them so that when they grew up, they could become more valuable labor. At this time, an old voice suddenly sounded, "My lord, for people of low status, knowledge is not a blessing, but a curse." Colin turned around and saw an old priest standing behind the two of them. Chapter 191. In this magical medieval world, knowledge was a precious treasure. Not to mention slaves, even civilians generally did not have the opportunity to come into contact with such wealth. Naturally, the nobles did not have to worry about this. Their castles had a large number of books, and there were also private tutors who were responsible for the education of the nobles. However, it was very difficult for the civilians to learn. There were two main ways for them to master knowledge. The first way was through the church. The churches in various places would set up schools for the civilians to study. However, the children here would basically learn theological knowledge. In addition to being taught a lot of principles on how to serve God and why to serve God, it was basically impossible for them to learn much useful knowledge in daily life. The second way was through the nobles. Yes, the nobles would also recruit some civilian children to accompany their own children. However, such a quota was very rare. Normally, it would only be left to the descendants of the retainers. After these descendants of the retainers grasped the knowledge, they would be able to better serve their lord. In fact, there was a third way, and that was the Empire's White Tower Academy. However, this way was very difficult for the nobles to come into contact with, let alone the civilians. This was because the White Tower Academy's admission requirements were very simple and harsh. It did not look at identity, but only looked at talent. Only talented children, regardless of whether they were nobles or civilians, could enter the White Tower Academy to study for free. However, there was only one White Tower Academy in the entire Empire of Light, and the number of students admitted every year was less than 2 digits. Therefore, most of the civilians would be illiterate their whole life, not to mention the slaves. However, this might be what the rulers wanted to see. The first pope of the Empire of Light, His Holiness Peter Messer, had a famous saying, "It is easier to fill an ignorant mind with loyalty and faith." Only the ignorant civilians and slaves would be able to facilitate the rule of the church and the nobles. Bishop Emeritus, do you think that I should not let people teach these slaves knowledge? Colin was not worried that his behavior would cause dissatisfaction with the church. After all, the church did not explicitly prohibit this. Of course, this was because generally, no lord would teach knowledge to the slaves. "No, my lord, I have no right to interfere with how you govern the people in your territory." The Bishop Emeritus bowed to Colin and said with a smile. After that, he bowed to Vera and it was obvious that he had recognized her identity. Colin's eyes flashed. He was not too surprised that the emeritus bishop could recognize him. After all, he had dealt with him many times. Moreover, his disguise was not very tight. Colin could only nod in agreement. Although he was wary of the church, Colin would not provoke them at this time. He hoped that Prince Harrison of the San Lorenzo family could become the hero charging at the front lines against the church, while he himself could just wave the flag and shout from behind. Seeing that his goal was achieved, the Bishop Emeritus nodded in satisfaction, then said, "Lord, there is something else I want to tell you." "Please tell me." "Next month, I will be transferred out of Ice Stone City. However, don't worry, there will be a new bishop to take over my position." "Oh. Where will you be transferred to?" "Chilly Winter City." A ripple appeared in the Bishop Emeritus' eyes. "Then I must congratulate you." Colin smiled. Compared to the Bishop of Ice Stone City, the Bishop of Chilly Winter City was clearly a promotion. The Bishop Emeritus also smiled humbly, but the joy on his face could not be concealed. The Bishop of Chilly Winter City was also a popular candidate for the Archbishop of the Northern Frontier Diocese. Therefore, this Bishop Emeritus was only one step away from stepping into the true core of the Church. "I wonder where Bishop Zion has been transferred to?" Vera suddenly asked. The Zion she spoke of was the former Bishop of Chilly Winter City. The Bishop Emeritus had a sorrowful expression and sighed, "Bishop Zion has returned to the embrace of the Lord." Vera was shocked and hurriedly expressed her apologies and condolences. However, Colin keenly saw a trace of unnaturalness on the Bishop Emeritus' face, so he asked, "May I ask, how did Bishop Zion pass away?" "From what I know, Bishop Zion passed away due to illness." "Passed away due to illness?" At this time, Colin was certain that there was something fishy about Bishop Zion's death. Thinking about it carefully, the Duke of St. Hilda was injured in the duel with the Troll Paladins, so the one who treated him was most likely this Bishop Zion. However, he passed away at this time. What secrets were hidden in this? What was the situation in Chilly Winter City? One question after another appeared in Colin's mind, causing him to unconsciously fall into a daze. Chapter 192. It was already the middle of March and they could already vaguely feel the arrival of spring. For the northern frontier where the winter was exceptionally long, spring seemed to have come a little early this year. Perhaps the merciful God could not bear to see the famine continue to wreak havoc, and he intended to bring forward the spring planting. However, even if the crops were planted now, they would have to wait until autumn to harvest the crops. Therefore, the famine was destined to take more lives in the northern frontier. It was also destined to cause more turmoil. Chaos is a ladder. Colin read the letter in his hand with a playful expression on his face. "Is that all?" Vera asked curiously when she saw that Colin had stopped reading the letter. The two of them were enjoying their breakfast at this time when Eamon suddenly handed them a letter that he had just received. The letter was from Iron Furnace City and it was obvious that it was written by Marquis Dawson. "Yes, that's all." Colin sneered as he crumpled the letter into a ball and threw it into the fireplace. The flames flickered for a moment before calming down. "Marquis Dawson must be trying to win you over, right?" Vera asked as she sipped her milk. Her heart was stirred up by the letter. "I think so." Colin looked at Vera, who was a little pale, and reached out his hand to hold her cold little hand. He comforted her, "Don't worry, I will cut off the head of this shameless dwarf who betrayed your father with my own hands." "Okay." Vera nodded as she held Colin's hand. She felt a little relieved. Colin continued to eat the food on his plate as he thought about the words in Marquis Dawson's letter. Perhaps, as the winter was about to end, the turmoil in the northern frontier would gradually begin. After breakfast, Colin was about to take Vera to the garden for a walk. However, Eamon suddenly walked over and said, "Master, the messenger from the northern frontier is here again." The northern frontier? Colin was stunned for a moment before he understood who Eamon was talking about. Wasn't this his future brother-in-law? "Bring him to my study room." "Yes, master." After that, Colin turned around and looked at Vera before he said, "Your brother is here." Do you want to meet him? Charles? Vera was taken aback, but soon after, her small face wrinkled up as if she was very conflicted. If you don't want to see him, then don't. I'm afraid he sneaked back this time. It's not appropriate for you to see him. Okay, then you go ahead. I'll go to the garden by myself. Okay, I'll come find you later. Ha, Sir Charles, welcome to Ice Stone City again. Viscount Angley, thank you for your hospitality. When he saw Charles again, his attitude towards Colin was still as respectful as before. It was as if he had forgotten that he was once the first successor of the Dukes of the North. Colin invited Charles to take a seat with a smile and asked the maid to bring coffee and pastries. However, Charles seemed to be in a hurry. After taking a sip of coffee, he asked directly, Viscount Angley, have you considered my suggestion from last time? Colin's heart trembled. He knew that Charles was still hung up on his suggestion to attack the giant demon king city. Charles, without the Duke's orders, I wouldn't dare to attack the giant demon empire without permission. Viscount Angley, you're not attacking without permission. You're being forced to counterattack. What do you mean? When I returned from the front lines this time, the giant demon empire had already sent 100,000 troops south. They'll probably reach Ice Stone City in a month or so. Colin's heart skipped a beat. Oh. The giant demons really sent out their troops. Charles said solemnly, it's absolutely true. Viscount Angley, the giant demons have sent 100,000 troops south this time. It can be said that they've used up all of their resources. Right now, the giant demon empire's internal defenses are basically useless. As long as you lead an elite cavalry, you'll be able to easily take down the giant demon king's city and make a great contribution. Seeing that Colin was still hesitating, Charles tried to persuade him again. Viscount Angley, I know that you've received help from the half-elven kingdom. With the Silvermoon Guard helping you defend Ice Stone City, you don't have to worry about your rear being unstable even if you move the Black Cavalry away. Since that's the case, why don't you take a gamble with me? Colin rolled his eyes in his mind. Of course you're willing to take a gamble. You don't have to pay the stakes anyway. Charles, although your plan does move me, I still need to ask the Duke. Then it'll be too late. Charles was a little anxious. Viscount Angley, the giant demon army had already moved out before I left. If you ask Winter City for instructions, the giant demons might have already approached Ice Stone City. At that time, how are you going to send troops to ambush the giant demon king city? Doesn't the Golden Lion army have 3 fortresses at the front lines? Can't they delay the giant demon army? The fortresses Colin spoke of were actually the 3 fortresses that Prince Okamoto had given to the Duke of St. Hilda during Vera's coming-of-age ceremony. The giant demon king city was surrounded by snowy mountains. There were only 3 main paths that could allow an army to pass through, and these 3 fortresses just happened to be at the crucial points of these 3 paths. Viscount Angley, do you know how many troops the Golden Lion army has stationed in these 3 fortresses? Charles's face was full of helplessness. How many? 3,000. 3,000 in total? Yes. And most of them are new recruits. Colin was speechless. The Golden Lion army had only stationed so few people in such an important military location. How could they possibly stop the giant demon army? No. Colin suddenly realized that the Duke of St. Hilda might have purposely given up on these 3 fortresses. Firstly, the Golden Lion army needed to concentrate their forces to deal with the internal rebellion. Secondly, the Duke of St. Hilda might have purposely lured the giant demons out. If that was the case, my apologies, Charles. Without the Duke's orders, I will not send troops. Colin's attitude suddenly became abnormally firm. Charles looked at Colin's resolute eyes. After a while, he finally shook his head and sighed. Colin, have you guessed something? Colin also smiled. Charles, you should have met the Duke, right? This time, Charles didn't deny it. He nodded and said, "Yes. Since it has come to this, I won't hide it from you." This ambush plan was actually devised by father. As expected. Colin sneered in his heart. As expected, the Duke of St. Hilda wanted to use him. However, in the current situation, it would be too naive of him to think that he would send troops just because of Charles's provocative words and illusory achievements. Colin naturally understood that he had to send troops. This wasn't just because of the Duke of St. Hilda's orders. It was because once the giant demon army approached the northern frontier, Ice Stone City would very likely become their first target. However, the Duke of St. Hilda shouldn't think that he could make Colin work for him without paying a price. "Charles, since this is the Duke's order, I will definitely follow it. However, the messenger I sent to Coldwinter City has already waited for more than 2 months, and the Duke still hasn't received an audience. This kind of behavior really makes me disappointed. Viscount Angley, of course father knows that you want to marry Vera. He actually approves of this marriage. Therefore, as long as you are willing to send troops to attack the giant demon King's city, he will definitely receive your messenger." "Oh. Did the Duke really say that?" "Of course, I swear to you in the name of the holy ancestors of the House of St. Hilda. As long as you lead the army to attack the giant demon King's city, Vera will definitely marry into the Angeli family." Colin stared into Charles's eyes. After a long time, he finally nodded. "Good. In 3 days, I will send troops to attack the giant demon King's city." You're tuning in to the Blissful Bookshelf YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.